Hello, everybody, and welcome to TFT. I'm your host, Chester C. Busby III, and today we are talking about Bloodlines.
Woo!
All right, guys, we're going to talk, and thank you very much, George, for talking over my intro there. That was very nice of you. You have to wait until I cue you, dude, before you speak, because I have a kind of a thing set up to do with that, all right? But
Sorry
nevertheless,
about that, audience.
yeah, sorry about that. I was almost cool. It was almost cool. Right? But anyway, thank you guys for coming in. And of course, this is the third or fourth tinfoil talk, and we're going to be doing bloodlines today. And of course, that's a very interesting and fun conversation. And this whole show here is fun and interesting, actually. And I want to come over to the chat and say hello to everybody. We see Roger Heller is in here. He says, "Hello, everybody. How's it going? Happy Sunday, happy Monday to you, Mr. Busby. Oh, thank you. Hope everyone's doing fantastic. Well, I am doing fantastic for sure. Model 3 is in here, says good evening. Bethany's in here. She says hi, everybody. And of course, yeah. And keep in mind, guys, we really appreciate you being here, and all those links down below you can check out, please. But also keep in mind that hitting that share button and letting people know what's going on is very, very helpful to us. Other than that, we're going to jump right into it, and I'm going to come over to the panel we have here. And the first one we've got is George. Hey, George.
Greetings. I am odd at odds being here today. All this wonderful information that it's going to be unraveled. I am curious.
Well, that's good, George. I'm glad. And of course, we are going to have some interesting information. Some of it will be absurd, and some of it will be actually historical, I imagine. But let me go to the historical side, and then I'll go to the absurd side later. Of course, hello, DeWolf. How you doing?
Nice. I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hang in for the entire time, but I definitely wanted to stop in and speak about this a little bit.
No, absolutely, man. It's a fun conversation, and I kind of expected, of course, what we do here with the TFT guys is everybody kind of brings their own homework, as it were, and they introduce their own things, and then in a more loose manner, I will go and search things live and show imagery and try to back up what these guys are talking about and giving you information as we go. But I kind of expected to see something maybe more out of the Bloodlines of Noah or something from you. That might have been more interesting. But we'll see what you offer today. And of course, then to the absurd, Sir, Lord of Lightning and Thunder, the holder of oiled things, Thundero.
You and those oiled things. I had a lot of oiled things in my hands today, working on my car. I literally just got done. Came right in here. Hello. How is everybody?
I'm good, and I appreciate the fact that you came in here, dude.
I
How
didn't.
did it go though? Did you fix it?
Yeah, of course I fixed it, Chester. Come on, it's me you're talking to.
All right, right on, man. Yeah. Well, I haven't done much auto mechanics in my life. I remember when I was young, I had to replace a carburetor, and I took like a full schematic and bought the carburetor, put it back in with the schematic, and it worked. So I did something, and that's like the only time I ever really touched a car. But
We'll mark that down. We found something
yeah,
that Chester has not done in depth.
no, I haven't. Well, dude, there's a lot of things I haven't done. I haven't done in depth. I do try. I am a person who tries to be as knowledgeable as about as many things as I can. The problem is, DeWolf, as I get older, I realize it's an impossible task, and the more I learn, the more I realize is the less I know, and it's it's one of those
It
things.
takes
And the more,
time.
yeah, I think it takes
Takes extra
more.
time, and then it takes money, and of course, making money takes time. And
Hmm.
I want to do something else.
Well,
Yeah.
not everyone, Jackie Gleason.
Oh, okay. Talk about a way back comment.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. But anyway, thank you guys for all for coming in here. I see Eric Hawkins is in as well. Now I want to put a caveat on top of this before we jump into this, and understand that with TFT we're just having fun, right? If you guys have got an opinion on something, that's awesome. If you want to come in here and talk about your opinion, let me know. love to have you. But we're just having a good fun time with this. We're not taking this crazy, crazy serious. And we know some people do, but that's not what we're doing here. We're just having fun.
And don't overanalyze it.
Yeah.
We're having fun with it. We
Yes.
obviously know there's logical explanations for most of it. Not all of it. Some things are weird. But there's logical explanations for most of it if you just think about it. But we're just having fun. We're enjoying the
Speak for
ridiculous.
yourself.
Speak for yourself. There you go. And here's another thing. Another thing I've learned, DeWolf, in my life, is the fact that we don't know anything. Not really. I mean, we have a general understanding of how things work because we've stumbled into them over the millennia. But we humans really don't know anything. So, in all honesty, you can believe whatever you want. As long as you don't hurt anyone along the way, who cares what you believe? It's not like anyone can truly prove you're wrong anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Just enjoy yourself. And sometimes the crazier things are way more fun than the reality. So,
Yeah,
good to go.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We only know what is not true. We do not know all the truth, and
No,
we never
don't.
will.
I don't even
That's
think humans have
just
any truth at all, actually. We don't
yeah,
have a true truth. We don't, not yet. I
right.
think one day we will. I think sometime in the future, humanity will have a truth or two, or maybe more. I would like for us to eventually to understand exactly how electricity works. That would be nice.
It would.
Especially it would be, especially seeing it's kind of the backbone of the world today. But maybe one day we'll actually understand why an electron spins.
We
Um,
don't even know why circuit
That,
boards work. They
that's
just
easy.
do.
That's easy. I can tell you right now. Very simple. You just go to the wall and you flick the switch. Electricity works.
there you
Works
go.
just fine.
That simple.
By George in March 2019. Awesome.
Give
All
this
right.
man a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah,
Give it to him.
absolutely.
Science. Do it.
All right. Now let me go ahead and switch over to, for my purposes, over to this page here, and let me throw my couple of caveats, and I'll go and I'll share and start searching for these things that we're looking at. But understand that we're talking about bloodlines. Now, what does that mean? That could mean many things, and as far as I'm concerned, it could mean anything anyone here wants to talk about. But
Mhm.
mainly, when you're talking conspiracy theories and bloodlines, what you're talking about is the royals of Europe, right? Because we know that they can all trace their bloodlines back to Babylon, to Persia,
Yes.
right? And now that's not actually a conspiracy theory. It just is. The conspiracy theories come out of, why, what, and how. And of course, in all honesty, you can link that right back to Egypt too. Another big conspiracy I'm sure will come up to that I want to add a caveat to because, just to make sure we understand it off the top. All American presidents are related. Now, the
Hmm.
fact of the matter is, all but 8 of them are actually cousins, which is
Right.
crazy, but it's true. And supposedly America is not supposed to have some kind of aristocracy, and obviously we do. We have a single family aristocracy, and that
Hmm.
family is being traced back to the Bruce family. Now, the other 8 presidents, they say, are also related. Well, they're related within 8 steps of the Bruce family, and to give you an understanding what that means, I am related to the Bruces within 8 steps. Less, actually. I think I'm 6. So that doesn't
Uh-oh.
say much. Well, no, it doesn't say much, actually. But the other ones, what are we on now? What is this, 40 what now?
45.
40. Yeah, he's
45. So,
Trump's 45.
so 37 of our presidents are family, legitimately family, and that includes Obama. I mean, the fact that Obama and George W. Baby Bush there are actually cousins. It's no joke. It's real. So
Come again?
he's Barack Obama and George W. Bush are cousins.
Holy.
It's through
You
his
just
mama,
blew
through his
George's mind.
mama, of course. But yeah, I mean, because everyone would forget about, they call Obama the first black president. Yeah, sure he is, but he's half black. He's a mulatto, really.
Yes.
But they all are pretty much. I mean, finding a pure-blooded African in America that didn't immigrate is very hard. Actually, they're pretty much
Yes.
they're all mulatto at some level or
Just
another.
like it's hard to find a pure-blooded European
It
in
is.
America.
It
There's
is.
we're
Oh, no,
pretty
no.
much
We already know a pure-blooded European. Elizabeth Warren.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Because even with me,
Talk about a bloodline.
uh, even with someone like me, who I am a full-on Gaelic Celt, and but and you could say, in a pure-blooded way, but even then I'm not, right? So being
Hmm.
pure-blooded is super rare thing, right? My wife is pure-blooded, but that's because she's Japanese and they don't like people coming over here, for a
Right.
long time, right? So it just doesn't work like that for us Americans. We are mutts. We are the great melting pot, right? So I mean, and it
Yes.
applies to all of us. And unfortunately, I hate to inform all the haters in the world, but yeah, the different types of white people are different. They're not the
Yes. Shh.
same.
It's a secret.
Yeah, but it's like saying, white people is the same as saying Africans. I mean, do you know,
Hmm.
how many different type
Well,
of
it's the same people who
racially
think that.
diverse people there are in Africa?
Yeah, it's like the same people who think Arabs and Persians would be the same thing, and they're not. They're
Oh, they're
different.
definitely not. Yeah, they're definitely not. But yeah, especially for me, I had to do a lot of that standard study in school with, studying bone morphology and things like that. And there's many different types of humans in Africa that just because they all have a similar melatonin level doesn't really mean anything when it comes to the morphology of their anatomy, right? So.
Yeah, it's interesting. How has your father just said Baka Gaijin? Do you get called a Gaijin anymore, or they pretty much accepted you over there?
Dude, no one gives me a hard time at all. I'm 6'3" and I'm built like a mountain. I get zero troubles from
You're
anyone.
sir. You're sir
I
everywhere
am
you go,
sir.
right?
Yes, and I have this certain aura about me. I don't know if you guys can feel it through the mic, but yeah, no one gives me a hard time anywhere ever, dude. Besides, Japanese are very peaceful, soft people now.
Yeah.
They have a wonderful culture here. They're
A
good
couple of nukes will
people.
do that to you.
Yeah, no, it will shift your thinking, man. But they do
Yeah.
do. The only problem is they're a bit too soft, I think.
Yes.
But no, I don't have any trouble here, dude. And of course, baka, it means silly or foolish.
Hmm.
But they have different versions. Baka is kind of like a common tongue use. It simply means silly. But if you get into something like baka yaro or bakatare or something like that, that is far more offensive. And a gaijin or a gaikokujin would be the more appropriate one. It
Hmm.
isn't used derogatorily anymore. It's kind of like in China, they used to call us guaylo, but
Hmm.
that doesn't really have a negative meaning anymore either. So it's just the
Hmm.
world has changed. Yeah, uh,
Fascinating.
it is. Yes, and we don't need to get into language lessons, I suppose. But what are we
I
talking about?
would
Oh yeah,
love
yeah.
to. I would love for you to teach me some Japanese, but you refuse.
Okay, I will teach you to say, "Don't touch it." Okay, you ready? Uh, All right. Anyway, let me continue on the bloodline thing. So anyway, so those are the two main things, and but keep in mind that with the royal one, I'm sure we'll have some interesting conversations about that. But the American president one, uh, the fact that all American presidents are related to the Bruces or in each other, it's not with eight of them at least. It's not as true as the people just kind of throw it out. I just want to put that
Hmm.
caveat in there, right? Because I'm sure I got a couple of people I'm talking to here who are not that many steps away from Bruce. Because you can understand the Bruce family, and the Strathclyde families south of them. They're all linked. They're all cousins and
Hmm.
stuff, right? And I'm a Strathclyde. That's what I am. And but all those Strathclyde families, they all had to run away, right? Because in the 1650s, King James hired all the Strathclyde mercenary clans. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm a Busby, and I am Black Watch, right? The Black Watch in
Hmm.
Britain, the famous Black Watch, that comes from my family, actually, right?
Hmm.
And But all those Strathclydes were all mercenary clans, right? And James spent a ton of money to hire them all to go take the British throne, and he did. And then he turned around and made them illegal because they were the only one who could take his power away. The bastard, right? But what did they do? Well, they ran away. They escaped, and of course, if you think about the 1650s, where did they escape? America. So a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
Strathclyde clans came over and were in that those first early immigration waves into the states, and talking about bloodlines. And so there's a lot of those Strathclyde bloodlines in America. And of course, we had later waves from Germans and of course Italians, et cetera, Irish. The Strathclydes themselves are very heavy in the Americas, and this is why you have so much connection to the Bruces, because they were kind of the boss of all of Scotland, including the Strathclyde lowlands. If you don't know what Strathclyde means, it simply is the lowland Scot is what it is. So I
Gotcha.
mean, so that's why it is. I would not be surprised if these dudes sitting here with me don't have some kind of step away from a Bruce, simply of several hundred years of inbreeding within the American blood pool. I'm sure they do, right? So anyway, I just wanted to add that caveat because we're talking about bloodline, so I thought I'd talk about blood a little bit. But let me shut up and let someone else talk. Who wants to start this campfire off?
I
Uh,
Thought,
nominate the wolf.
wow.
there you go.
The
Um,
wolf has been nominated.
certainly, and so I'm going to take a I guess an academic view at this point and say let's discuss why bloodlines may even exist in the first place,
Hmm.
right? Because when you break this down into its simplest form, it is a grand version of tribalism.
Hmm.
Like Abraham, he had his own people, and then you had some little, we'll say, Egyptians, right? Even with Egyptians, well, even with Abraham, his descendants, of course, broke down into different tribes within one nation, and then you have, of course, in the Americas, we have all these different tribes, all these different names,
Hmm.
from Potawatomis to Cherokees, Comanche, Mohegan, right? All these are different tribes. And what that means is when you're selling in an area and you're gathering resources, you need to trust a certain group of people, right? It also happened in the Wild West. Oh, I say wild. It happened in the West, right, where people would have these families, and all through the South when they're building plantations. You had a large family. You intermarried. You got daughters and sons marrying, and you would try to increase your holdings and increase the amount of your land and your monies and whatnot, right?
Hmm.
So that happens within all these different cultures. It's a common thing that you want to create something that is together, that you can trust, and usually that's familial. So you have your family that does that, right? And even if you have someone that comes into your area, you can adopt them into the family. They're adopted. They're a member of the tribe, so to speak, and they become, once again, part of the family.
Hmm.
And that was a big deal. Nowadays, we
That's
don't
right.
use family like that in that sense. But that then created your whole uh, area, your whole country around you. Then what you knew all these people, and you had influence over them, and so that became a power base. So you now have built up your power base within your using your family and bringing in people, and that was a very important thing, right? So it was for resources, it was for power, um, and be successful to be just successful over other groups of people. Now we turn that over into the concept of bloodlines, and now you have, once again, as your bloodline stretches out. I think as you use the term, the Bruces, right?
Yeah.
So all these Bruces, then you understand who they are. They come from a certain mentality because a lot of these people, you were either raised that way or you had to take on their religion. There's all kinds of mental concepts so
Hmm.
that you understand how they operate. They understand how you operate. You know that the next generation is, once again, going to operate in the same manner and remain a power base. So as that happens throughout more modern times, you no longer have your tribe, if you will, constrained to one area. Now that power that you can have over people to accumulate resources and influence, that can now stretch out. through a grander, globally, by now perspective, when you have that into the Americas perspective, you have the idea of the East India Trade Company,
Sure.
the banking systems. We know that, and so you get your people into these different entities of commerce, and basically created a power base. And of course, political. You talked about the presidents. Now that's your political power base, and so that's where this idea even has a lot of relevancy, based upon the idea of having be able to bring together money, power, influence
Hmm.
over now very broad areas over the globe.
Well, interesting
How's
stuff.
that for a
Opening.
foundation?
That's a foundation. It certainly is.
Yeah.
And I do think this question is coming in from Matthew would probably expand that thinking, and I'm sure you'll be interested in this. Matthew says, Chester, hopefully you guys talk about the bloodline theory, the one about Jesus surviving marrying Mary Magdalene and the Rosicrucians. Now, that is very interesting. You're talking about Dan Brown here. And of course, I think DeWolf would agree with me. I'll let him speak for himself, of course. But this is really, really kind of the confusion. We've had this conversation before, but this is a little bit of the confusion between Yeshua and Isus, right?
Mhm.
Very contemporaries, or some would argue they were separated by 30, 40 years, but I mean, it doesn't matter. They're two figures that have become intermingled throughout time here, the past couple of millennia. And Isus, of course, was the king of Petra. He was the Galilean, which means he cut his balls off to show his servitude to God. And you understand this is a Hebrew sect, right? And he is the one who made war with Rome because he actually had a bloodline claim to the throne of Rome, right? So you
Mhm.
got the whole thing of Isus, and over time it has become intermixed with Yeshua. Now Yeshua was a prophet. Some of the Gnostic stories talk about him a lot. Now, what Dan Brown did was he took that mixing of Yeshua and he tacked on a possible history of Isus into Europe, I think. Now, that's arguable, but did you want to touch on that, DeWolf? Because I know you have an opinion on that.
I suppose so. Wow. What your addition? I think your addition is something that the Matthew wasn't even expecting, right? Because what Dan Brown did, he took the straight line back to Jesus himself, Yeshua,
Sure,
and said, okay, he's now married Magdalene, and they have a child thereafter,
sure.
and that bloodline is going to continue on and influence the world. What you're saying is, and Matthew, this is where this becomes a interesting topic for debate, because now you have someone else who was involved in the rebellion with the Jewish people,
Hmm.
and he has this similar naming concept, and that happens all throughout history.
Yeah,
You names and people getting confused and the like. So now you have someone who actually would have had children and
no,
could
sure.
have a bloodline. Of course,
Hmm.
later on, I mean, after he became involved,
Yeah.
and took the practice that you said, well, there would not be a bloodline.
Oh no, he had
But
kids
if he
before, dude. He did that when he was quite older.
right,
Yeah,
right, so he had kids beforehand, which if he then went through this practice, that would make those children rather special, right? Because he couldn't have any more.
hmm,
So then that gives a little bit of a mystique around them.
sure. Yeah,
So you have these children then would have gone and had more children as well, giving you a bloodline. And when you consider the fact of the Jews, they wanted someone in power, they wanted someone who would rebel, and then if he died off, maybe his kids were the next in line, because that, of course, that was happening always throughout history. The children of the
yeah,
king would take up the throne.
of course.
And so with this as a possibility, then you have Dan Brown looking at Jesus and Mary Magdalene, all this other stuff. He's like, oh, aha, I found something that can match in
Yeah,
here. And if I put these stories together,
yeah,
then all these other children he had beforehand, we can call them Jesus's children, even though they're not the
Well,
one that we normally think about.
it's actually a little more intertwined than that, even, DeWolf, because think of it. We call him Jesus. We don't call him
Right.
Yeshua. We call him Jesus. Where are we getting that from? We're getting it from the king of Petra, Isus. That's where the name Jesus is coming from. Now, the most of the Bible, not all, there's some things that have been mixed in there too, dude. But most of the the Messiah character, the prophet, the holy man, that is Jesus in the Bible is Yeshua, right? But yet it has been mixed in even down to the name we use in English from this other dude who was a king who was trying for political purposes. As a matter of fact, we don't have tons and tons of detail to know, but you could surmise that the reason he took on to become a Galilean at such a late age in his life was to simply get political favor with a certain group of Jesuits, right? Not Jesuits. I mean, Jewish houses or what have you. I mean, it was probably a political move, right? Because he
Hmm.
he didn't live his life as a Galilean. He shifted right, at the very end when he was trying to make his political move. So I'm sure there were, and of course, the interesting tie into this, which I know you, DeWolf, have a very big interest in, and I certainly think it's fascinating as well, is when we get into talking about the Templars, because a lot of people think the Templars went straight to Jerusalem and it was all about God and stuff, but that's not actually true. They went to Odessa first, and they showed reverence to the Odessan crown. And of course, Petra being an Odessan, historically Odessan, right? A lot of the things they brought back, and we saw this shifting with, say, and I love the science and research that's been done into this topic, by the way. But when we look at the Norman fantasy versions of King Arthur, which are really the ones we know, Camelot, in Hollywood, all those kind of movies that come out are really coming off the French fantasies, not the original historical hero. Or even mythological hero that is Uther, but those things have a lot of the touch and story of Isus in it, and therefore the Arthur is actually a hidden telling of the story of Isis. He is the Fisher King, the wounded king. Well, what is the wound? Well, he cut his balls off because he became a Galilean, right? I mean,
That's a
no, it's
wound.
it's very
It's a
serious.
hell of a wound.
There are some dude, there are some really really cool serious research that have been done into this, and it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
We
you know, I don't know enough about that to even argue.
we
All I know
will
is I know the
definitely.
original Celtic information that comes
Oh, sure.
is kind of before that even. So there's like
Definitely. Yeah.
same similar stories popping up in different realms. I think George had something to say.
No, it was me. Um,
Oh, okay.
I will definitely be touching on Arthur again because it's going to link into kind of what I want to talk about. But it's back to Petra. It's interesting how important Petra is in the New Testament because at the end of days, basically, in prophecy, the Jews, the converted Jews, the ones that accept Jesus, that God comes to save eventually, they flee to Petra when
Hmm.
the Antichrist is coming to slaughter them, to finish them off. Um, and Jesus obviously shows up and saves them, and that's Armageddon and da da da.
Hmm.
But it's just interesting that it's Petra is one of the places that he was responsible for, right? That is Isus was responsible for, and it's just an interesting connection between what Chester's saying and then what's in the scripture. Um, I don't know if there's anything like conspiratorial about it, but that's probably part of what Chester's talking about, where there's a
Hmm.
blending of these characters
There are. Yeah.
throughout the scripture.
Yeah, and I know a lot of Christians might take offense to that because they feel that the King James Bible is the holy word of God and it's unerrable and unchangeable. And I get that, and I have a complete respect. I have never ever have any desire to insult anyone's religion because whatever makes you happy and helps you get out of bed and live a better life is good. Good, I think, a good thing. But understand that you are looking at a book just at the time of King James having it translated, that had been translated through the Septuagint, through the Torah writings in during their incarceration in Babylon, that are coming
Hmm.
out of Egyptian texts, which are coming out of Sumerian, excuse me, Assyrian and Akkadian and Sumerian tales, and all of those, when you get back to the say the Epic of Gilgamesh and stuff, they all say that these are copies taken from a library from before the flood. So
Hmm.
goodness gracious, we have no idea where these stories originate, and they're all the same story. They just various levels of color. So I understand that people can take offense to that, but just understand that the King James Bible is a book that does have some amalgam in it. And what I would suggest, would be this: the the concept of God itself does not need a book.
Correct.
So,
Well,
Plus,
let's
in
this
Christian,
this
in a lot of hang on one second, a lot of Christian dogma, they should agree with you anyway because they would say the stories originated from God, and He spread them throughout all of
hi-
humanity, and that's
history.
why there's so many similar stories
Yeah.
all over the place. And some people just lost the plot over the decades or over the centuries. So that's how I was always raised anyway. That's why they will explain everybody has a biblical flood or a worldwide flood story. And everybody has a semi-similar, for the most part, creation idea of a God creating things, a being creating things. Um, it's because the original beings would be Adam and Eve, of course, got all this information directly from God. So that's why everybody has the same basic ideas
Mm,
is what Christian the Christian dogma I was taught anyway. That's why when you look at history and there's so much echoing of some of these stories, even scripturally, there's echoing of the stories in there, like Samson and Hercules, and these stories are very similar. Um, it's because of that, because of the same stories being told by God through other people.
yeah, sure. Now we have Matthew in here. Matthew is really interested in the conversation. We appreciate that, dude. And you should actually come on here and join us, is what I think you should do. But Matthew says, Chester, have you heard about the town in Japan that says Jesus came to that town way back when? They have some festival for it, and they sing a song that mix of old Japanese and Hebrew words. Yes, I do, and they're a crazy cultist. Matthew also says, Chester, the Bible is a book written about a game of telephone, so you know how that goes. Well, that's a fair point. Understand that I just put the caveat in there because I don't want to offend people. I surely don't. But you have to understand what you're reading and the time involved that has passed, right? And the politics that have come as well. I mean, the simple fact of the matter, all the history we talk about, no, we don't know if that's actually history, guys. The people who win wars, the victors, write history. We know this this
Yes.
expression, right? And it's a very truthful thing. So we don't really know. All we can do is go based upon what we have, and then try to find physical evidence in the world that will compare to it. And this is the art of anthropology. And yes, I did use the word art because it applies. But
Hmm.
and the telephone thing is a very apropos comment actually, because when you play that game of telephone, which we all did as kids, where in the line do you want to get the original information? Well, of course, you want to get it to as close to the front of the line as you possibly can. Therefore, as we stand right now, what you want to do, if you want to understand these biblical stories, you need to be reading the Enuma Elish, or you need to be reading the old Celtic Eddas and stuff, because those are the oldest stuff we got, and they're the same stories. And the only real difference with the Enuma Elish, or even something like Gilgamesh, for instance, because that has a lot of those biblical stories in it too. Not all, but it has some.
Hmm.
Noah, particularly. But the only difference in those stories, the outcome's the same. The people involved, their names might be different, but they're the same people. The only difference is the older you go back, the more color is involved, meaning the more detailed it is. It's not do we just have this story about this boat that Noah was building. We have details of exactly more precise details of what it looked like, who exactly was involved. There's more conversations, but the general information is unchanged. So I mean, if you believe the concept of the telephone game and being close to the beginning as you can, well, you should be reading these other things, even if you are religious, just for the sake of having a better understanding of these stories, which you base your spirituality around. I would suggest.
Now wait a second. I gotta
I knew.
I
I
gotta
know.
say no to this, right?
That's why
Because
I did that
well,
in
because
one
there's
breath,
act
DeWolf. That was one breath. I did it on purpose. All right.
because of the fact that there's over 5,000, nearly 6,000 copies of the Greek New Testament that
Yes.
we know about, right? That's a tremendous amount of books, and then of course you go to Old Testament. The Old Testament when it was written and rewritten, right? Because of the time, the scrolls would wear out. They were constantly writing them, and if they made one little mistake, that one was burnt, and they started over, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that from the Old Testament to the New Testament, these things were put down. You could almost say in stone. We have more copies. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of copies of the Bible. And if you talk about that versus say like Shakespeare, the Odyssey, all these other things that came down from Aristotle and the like, those are a few handfuls of works.
That's right.
And the works that are from the Bible itself just overrun them in number. So I have to disagree on that point that it's necessarily a telephone game. I do want to step back to the original idea that we had here, and that was the part about Mary Magdalene,
Yeah.
and the Rosicrucians. Now, the Rosicrucians, they came upon the scene much later. They were the
Much
1600s,
later, dude. Yeah. Way later.
much later.
Yeah.
That changes a lot, right?
It
We give a
does.
lot of credence into the story of the Rosicrucians and what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do protect the bloodline, and we give some sort of a power to them when they were much later. When you consider the fact of 1,600 years between what you would think was the start of the bloodline versus when the Rosicrucians came about, what happened in that time frame? Now, you could make the inference that what I like to do sometimes is go backwards instead of forwards. So don't try to go to Jesus and find out where something happened. Go to the Rosicrucians and then find out what happened, right?
Yeah.
So with the Rosicrucians, one of the big things that happened within a few hundred years of them were, you'd have to say, right, the Templars. And because they would be the next people that you'd come upon, and also the Merovingians. I believe those were the French Christians.
Yes.
And a bloodline, if you will, too.
It's definitely a bloodline.
So then you go back from the Templars. Of course, the Templars spanned then back several hundreds of years to the 1100s, and back to the Crusades, and then you still have 1,000-year gap between Jesus and the starting of the Templars. So now you'd have to find out, well, what happened to those people, and why. And I think Dan Brown makes it to where I guess they actually left the Holy Land. They went to France, and I guess maybe they were coming back because they were in the Merovingians. It gets very convoluted in that respect. And then of course you have to also take into the concept of what do the Templars and the Rosicrucians believe? What are these concepts, and does it match up even with the story?
No, all I'm saying with that, dude, is I think what Dan Brown is following, though, isn't Mary Magdalene. I think he's following Isus's mother and house as they escaped his failed coup, right? I think that's what
Okay, I can
comes
go
down
along
to,
with that.
right? And
I can go along with that
yeah,
possibility, which is which is why I like us having this back and forth here, because then it brings up the question, why? Why is it important? Why did someone come up with that idea? Is it because we think that Isis has a bloodline of power base, say, once again, the kingdomhood? And of course,
well,
oftentimes we think that a king is ordained. That's why
can
the king and his son and thereafter.
can I interject real quick on that?
No.
Please.
So the king is ordained, and then it comes down through
All
his
right.
bloodline to be the next person who should be the king of the area, right?
Yeah.
That's a very worldly view of it all. Then there's the Jesus, the Yeshua concept. If he had children, now is there something special about them because of the old adage, there's power in the blood?
Yeah.
Now you may.
Okay. Yeah, no, first of all, I never touched the New Testament, dude. That's a whole nother bear. I'm always talking about Torah when it comes to those conversations. But it's the thing, the reason why I think it's very clear that that's what he's talking about is because for two reasons. One, that family could not escape south because that's all controlled by Rome, completely, right? So the only places they could have really went would have been north into quite wild lands, into Ural Mountains. They could have gone east into the wandering lands. God, who wants to do that? So the only real fair choice for them to do would have been to go, northwest, which would be into Europe for one. Two, one of the reasons that the Templars stopped in to Odessa first before they did anything, and the reason why they were looking for that bloodline was because if they had that bloodline, they could use that politically in Jerusalem to try to take political power instead of having to be complete military domination.
Oh yeah. Political power.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, getting the hearts and minds of people versus just having to beat them over the head.
Well, you know what I mean? I mean, there's legitimate
Directly.
reasons why the Templars did what they did. It isn't all mystical, magic, supernatural stuff. It's, actual politics, real world stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
we do have Giga Death comic book in here,
yeah.
and
Oh, we
it
do.
says that I used to be a member of the Amorc, which is the Rosicrucians.
Uh-oh. Kick him out. Get him out of here. Get out of here. I'm just kidding.
Why? We got a Mason sitting right next to us. What are you talking about?
I know. I know. One of the bad guys right here.
Yeah. Now that is kind of interesting. That's getting a little bit off topic. I think we've been on topic pretty well so far, but the whole thing would say like the Masons, right, or the Rosicrucians, because they have their connection to those kind of secret society type stuff. But a lot of them are taking information from the old Church of Mithra and the old Egyptian lore and stuff like that, and they're building it in a modern time. So I guess I could ask you a question, DeWolf. Being a Mason and have the historical or cultural aspect of the Masons with a historical connection, how accurate do you think the modern retelling of the ancient Mithra and Egyptian stories in the Mason lodges are?
Well, um,
Wow, I did it again, DeWolf. I'm sorry. Oh well, Thunder, I
yeah,
must be punished.
yeah. Well, so what that makes me do though is go through the information in my head, right?
Hmm.
Go through it and think about it. And while I'm doing that, I'm also trying to figure out what exactly is this this constant uh, pounding of this Mithras, this Egyptian stuff you're talking about,
Hmm.
because it's not all Egyptian. It goes back to Jerusalem, right?
Sure.
I guess we'll say the whole biblical realm,
Yeah.
right? And
Babylon
how
too,
much is
I'd
it true?
imagine.
There's a lot of truth, but there's also the greater reason behind why some of those stories are actually built into there,
Oh yeah, I'm not
right?
talking about purpose. I'm not talking about purpose. I get that, dude. No, I'm
Yeah,
talking
that's
about
more purpose.
there's so much time between. Was what I'm trying to say. There's so much time between them that you got to imagine there's been loss to the story, right?
Well, there is, yeah, there definitely is loss to that, and that's one of the greater purposes of any of these societies is to get back to bringing this knowledge forward,
Hmm.
and finding more of it, investigating it, have that interest in it. You know.
Yeah. No, I understand completely. Now that was an interesting little dive we just did. Matthew directed us, and we went into a talk about Isis and Yeshua. Wow, and we did it without any kind of knives being thrown or fire being set. So nice. But it is a very interesting conversation. We could talk about that a lot and get into
Well,
details and stuff.
I
But
want you. I
yeah,
want you. I want you to actually address what I laid forward there, the why aspect, right? If is it in the bloodline? You know, this is about bloodlines. So,
yeah.
what is the bloodline potential in the Rosicrucianism story, as Dan Brown and the like has talked about, right?
Well,
What is it about the Jesus bloodline that would be
okay.
important?
Well,
What's that going to give man or men or the church or whatever?
Well, I would say this on that. I'll separate them. Isis, in the modern time, I don't know that it has much application at all, other than there's some royal bloodline, but I mean there are thousands of lost royal bloodlines. So as far as Isis goes in the modern time, I don't think it really has much meaning, and I think it just kind of got mixed in so much because the Templars saw it as being politically important, and that's why it's stuck with us, and that's why it's still prevalent. Now Yeshua, on the other hand, the question of whether he had kids or not, um, the thing is, especially we knowing that the initial sect that Joseph was a part of, and that he was raised in, I think it's really unlikely that he wouldn't have had kids anyway. Did Yeshua have children? I would imagine he must have, actually. It would be quite odd for him not to have kids, actually. Now, I understand the Catholics when they had their big old meeting that Constantine locked them in a room and said, "Get it, fix it, right, work it out." I
Hmm.
understand they made decisions then that kind of brought us to the celibacy of Jesus, but I don't think it makes any sense at all. So is there actual bloodlines running around that have some kind of, connection, no matter how much removed, to the Yeshua and his children? I'd imagine there are. Does that matter? I would say no. Because if you believe that Jesus, Yeshua, was the Son of God sent down to earth for a purpose, then his power is innate in his consciousness. It's not in his blood. So it wouldn't matter anyway, especially
All
seeing as he
right. All right.
resurrected and
Now,
walked
I
about for
personally
40
believe that
days. Huh?
that there is not children, and that's for several reasons. First off, the New Testament never talks about him ever being married, and then there's also the idea of everyone else thereafter talking about being, like you said, being celibate and not married. Could the
Yeah,
priest, could the head of the church be married? Right?
that's
For
not
years they
accurate at
said
all,
no.
dude. That's not accurate. I'm sorry. That is something the
They
Catholics added in, dude. It says very clearly in the Bible, and if you read it, it says that a man shall not have more wives than he can handle, but a priest shall only have one. It's laid down very clearly. And also, if you read the Gnostics, you understand that they portray Mary very much as his wife, and the Catholics are the ones that made her a whore, right? And they did this intentionally,
They didn't make her a whore. Her decisions made her a whore, Chester.
or whatever. But I mean, seriously, this is politic, DeWolf. This has nothing to do with religion or faith. That's politic, dude. Because you got to
I
understand
don't
is
really
that
understand personally why it matters. It doesn't
it
change
doesn't
anything of
matter.
that he did. I mean, if he was
Yeah.
married and had children and didn't fornicate, then he was still sinless. Um,
Yeah, but
he would
the
still be
Bible
the
doesn't
sinless
have, but
son of
sex is
God.
not a sin in the Bible. It's
Well,
not.
it is outside of marriage. If he would have done it, if he was married, that's fine. But if you do it before marriage, that'd be fornication. Um, so if he was married and sleeping with his wife, and if he did have children, there'd be no problem. That's completely sinless. If the idea is, according to the scripture anyway, the idea is he came to understand man and to take man's place, obviously to be the savior of the world, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
In order to understand the temptations of man, he would have had to be physically tempted at some point in his life. That would make
Yeah, but
sense. I
see,
mean,
yeah, I understand your point on that, but see, the Bible it does it does want to when we talk about the law of the
mhm,
Hebrews, and then we
mhm.
talk about faith. They are slightly separate issues, right? But when it comes down to the fact is the Bible does not hate sex. Catholics do, and then Protestants extra hate it, right? The Bible does not hate it. The Bible says rejoice in each other. It
Mhm.
encourages you to multiply yourself, right? Now there are a few rules they put in for good reasons. Do not mix your yoke, which I did, but once again, that's a Hebrew law, and they've stuck to it because some of the purest bloodlines on this planet are Hebrew ones, guys.
Mhm.
And They have other laws that are put down when dealing with homosexuality and things like that, and they're there for good reason, right? They're actually in the modern day where we have all this medicine and all this stuff. Being a homosexual is not troublesome per se, but in the ancient times, you better believe it was, right? So these
Mhm.
laws are put there for more of a community thing. But sex itself, God does not hate sex. He made us sexual for a reason if that's what you believe.
Mhm.
If you believe in God, then you have to believe that God rejoices in sex as he
No,
says we
the
should.
entire according to the Bible, the wisest man to ever live, his book, his specific book, is basically softcore porn. If you, when you read it, I mean, it's very descriptive about sexual acts and passion and things of this nature.
You
And
know,
that man was married to, no, Solomon, the Song of Solomon.
oh, Solomon, okay.
It's extremely sensual would be the right word. It's not really erotic. It's not technically sexual, but it's very right on that edge. When you read, especially if you know how to read it in the in the old original dialect.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, absolutely, you're 100% right. There's he wouldn't have made it so much fun if he hated it. Like, so,
Yeah.
uh, but there is strong evidence that he wanted it to be something done for marriage, in between a man and a wife. Now, but again, my point is regardless, even if let's say you say it wasn't, let's say you say he was married,
Hmm.
if let's say you even say that sex outside of marriage isn't a sin, like say you that's how you read it, and fine, it doesn't really matter as long as the mythological, if you want to call it that, the story is that he was blameless and sinless his whole life because he had divine blood in him. He was able to do that, and then was a sacrifice for the rest of the world. That's the point of the story. If
Yes.
that is still whole, that's all that really matters for the religious aspect.
Hmm.
Now you can talk about the historical ramifications and this and that and the political, which obviously there'd be huge political ramifications if Jesus had children and we could find a bloodline that led to Jesus. That would be massive. Even today, that would be huge. That would
Which is
shake the
why they
whole
don't
world.
want it, dude.
Right.
Which is exactly
Well,
why they
but because
want it.
you can
Because
look at what
trust me.
happened with the Muslims and Muhammad and his children and his grandchildren and how
Oh
much
yeah.
they changed everything over there.
Oh, they've absolutely been murdering each other ever since, dude. The
Yes.
Wahhabis versus the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds, they're all simply generals. And they broke off trying to take power, and they've just been murdering each other the whole damn time. Exactly. I understand why
Hmm.
the Catholic Church doesn't want anything to do with any kind of bloodline of Jesus. I get it, 100%. But Solomon is a whole. I just want to make one little comment about Solomon. If you haven't read about Solomon, particularly the extra biblical books about Solomon, you should, because basically it's the TV show Supernatural. It's really awesome. Yeah, it is. It is. He deals with demons and caging them, and oh, it's awesome. The stories. I don't know why
Yeah,
we don't have
Solomon was.
more movies about Solomon, dude.
It's interesting how much David is venerated in Christianity and Judaism, and Solomon, he still is, but it's not as much as David.
Yeah.
Whereas Solomon was really probably he was definitely more powerful than David as
Hmm.
far as a ruler. And biblically, you would think his place would be higher than David's because he was granted the greatest wisdom of all time. He was
Yeah.
supposedly the wisest man to ever live.
That's right.
So it's interesting that David gets the leg up over Solomon
And
because
there's
mainly
also
because he was a warrior.
yeah, but also because of his importance to the nation, I suppose. But
Yeah,
the thing though, there is far more written about Solomon as well. Way,
yeah.
way more. Matter of fact, one of the problems that the Jews have had when they went back into Israel here in recent times, and archaeology, of course, has really had to pass 150, 100, 170 years of anthropology being a thing, right?
Hmm.
in archaeology, in general. And when they went back in and took the Holy Lands back, because the British and all that kind of stuff that happened, um, they have had a really hard time proving that David was even real, right?
Yep.
But you don't have anybody questioning Solomon at all.
You kind of walked right into what my topic was going to be about. But since we're here,
Mhm.
yeah, like you were saying, Jesus's bloodline is also obviously very
David,
conspiratorial because people have said that these different things. Obviously, Jesus was a descendant of David according to the
that's right.
Bible.
That's right.
Um, he was the rightful king of the Hebrews.
That's right.
Because of that,
Hmm.
or he had a claim to it anyway. There's
Yeah.
probably a lot of people who had the same claim, um, but it's interesting that, like you said, they didn't have forever. They couldn't actually prove that David
Mm.
existed. Now they found some evidence, not
A
a
little bit.
ton, as far as I know it,
Mm.
but they have found some that he did exist now, and they can pretty confidently say that yeah, there was somebody at least named David that was the king of Israel at some point. Um, but if you go back, it's just interesting how important bloodlines are, even scripturally, even in the Bible. The most
Oh,
important book ever written for especially the Western world is the Bible.
sure.
And throughout a big chunk of that Bible is just genealogy. It's just telling you this person is this person
Sure.
to this person to this person. And it's really boring to read
It
because
is.
it's
Well,
literally just telling you the descendancy.
the
But
most
that's how
popular
important,
word is the most popular word is beget.
yes, that is how important it is because there is, as the wolf said, there is power in the blood. And what that is what we understand now is genetics, but they didn't have that sophistication to know that back then.
Or
And that's
did
why it's
they?
so important. Well, maybe they did. And that's why it's so important and why it's talked about so much throughout scripture because you could make the case that God was telling people this is important. Keep your bloodlines pure.
Yeah.
Don't screw them up.
Yeah.
And this
That
goes
it's
back
true.
to what
Yeah.
I was saying before I was cut off and dismissed. Because which and Chester, when he did that, he actually went to and said that the priests of the Catholic priests, they're not married, and he what he said was basically that they were wrong because priests
Yes.
before that were married,
I'm glad you caught
right?
that. Thank you.
It, the Jewish, yes, which proves my point because the Catholics believed that a priest should not be married because they're emulating that which Jesus gave to them.
Uh-huh.
The
Uh-huh.
idea that he was not married.
See, there you went and
So
just ruined. I had you back for a moment and then you threw it away.
So there you have all the, like you say, the arguments as to how it should be
Hmm.
because of the fact that he wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
that him not being married kind of threw that little chink in there, and then not having children is important. Why? When you look at the character of God, for there to be a bloodline of Jesus,
Hmm.
mhm.
it actually alters human history in the fact of what does that mean to have a bloodline and a royal bloodline that, like we always think that someone that is begat, like you said, is more special than others. Okay, God doesn't work that way. Jesus came, did his plan, and his plan was done. It was, and he even said it was finished on the cross. There's no other thing that comes after. There's nothing else. There's no other person. There's no other priest. There's no other way to get closer to God. You don't have to go through all these people. If there was a bloodline afterwards, we stupid people would have venerated them and elevated them to some great status. And that's not what God wanted.
Hmm. Just for clarification purposes, one is not begat, one is begut. But anyway, um, yeah, no, I know what you're saying, dude. Um,
Pedantic.
Yeah, pedantic.
Pedantic.
Now, it's really interesting to me. It's really interesting to me that this is how the first part of our today's conversation went, because it's not what I expected. I expected us to be on alien reptiles by now. But no, this is cool. No, because this is absolutely bloodlines, and it is conspiracy as
Hmm.
well. I don't know if it's conspiracy. Well, it is a conspiracy theory, because there's a lot of argument about it, about amongst a lot of different people. So it's interesting we went this direction. It's kind of cool. I'm glad we did
Yeah. Well,
actually. Dave
Okay.
and the
also
important
says
part,
that God Loves Sex is a great name for an album. Dude, that would be a cool album.
I bet you that's an album name already. I have a
Maybe.
feeling somebody's done that.
And I think, from my perspective, my religion, my spirituality, I think that when you do start talking about Jesus bloodlines and whether it's possible and why, you have to get into the nature of God Himself. What plan is He going to have? Is that part of that plan? And if it doesn't fit in there, then Occam's razor says that it doesn't fit in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
So Mothra is real?
Say what? Say it again.
Who? What'd you say? Did you say
Mothra?
I didn't hear what he said. What did he say?
You mentioned Mothra.
Nobody mentioned Mothra, dude. No one did.
Yeah. Mothra Egyptians. I think you said Mithra, but it was supposed to be Mothra.
Mithra. Yes, I most certainly said Mithra. But okay. Thanks, George.
You almost had me there.
Yeah, all right.
I did want to one last thing on this real quick. It's actually the Christian theology I was taught, the dogma I was taught, if you want to call it that, was that the reason Jesus was not married is because one day He will be married, and He was saving Himself for that future bride in heaven. When the body of believers, the reason why it's called the body of believers, will become Jesus's bride, and He will marry them. And I don't think that's a marriage like we understand marriage. I think it's more of a symbolic thing. I don't think we're all going to turn into a woman and marry Jesus. Maybe, but I don't think that's the plan. But that's what the Christian. That's how they get around that. That's how they explain that. They talk about the bride of Christ, and that is the body of the church.
Yeah.
All the saved people.
And besides that, I really hope there isn't a bloodline, because if there is, and someone eventually digs it out, I mean, have pity on those people. I mean, goodness gracious, they will be dead within a decade, right?
Yep. Or either that, or their life will just be a living hell.
Yeah, no, you don't. That's not a happy thing at all, dude. You know how the world is, particularly when it comes to Christians. You kill some Muslims, which is a horrible, horrible thing. The world won't shut up about it. You kill a Christian, that's just another day, right?
Yeah, just like a Sunday.
It is. I mean, you think I'm joking? Go check on the internet and see how many Christians were killed today, or yesterday, or last month.
Yeah.
Go check it out. Do you see the news ever talking about it? Nope. And it's all disgusting.
Indeed.
It is what it is. Now, what I think we should do, guys, is shift a little bit here, because Roger Heller he's here, and he says, "Is there any talk about werewolves or vampire bloodlines and political power during any era?" Now, of course, this is getting into reptilians and all those kind of things, which is fun conversations. So let me kick that off. And I'm sure these guys will go a completely different direction, but that's all right. Understand that as far as bloodline goes, there was a group of people from my people's land. I'm a Celt, right? And they were called the Aoshi, right? And the Aoshi were, these days, people would call them fairies, but that's, once again, the work of the Catholics. They're wonderful things they do to come in to dismiss and minimize and literally make things smaller so you can look down on them. But that's what the Catholics do. But the Aoshi were these tall, light-haired, light-eyed giants of sorts that were basically, a lot of the myths of vampires came out of them. Now, we do know that all over the world, the vampire is mentioned in one culture or another, although they're radically different. But the idea of something that is feeding upon you, parasitical, I think is just a part of human fear. And this is why we see it so widespread. But the vampire that is actually coming out of Irish and Celtic lore, actually, as many other things in your life are. The Aoshi are the origin of that. Now, that's a bloodline. Now, some people would argue that bloodline is still going around, and that's a very deep conversation that I'm probably the only one here that knows anything about. So that wouldn't be any fun at all to talk about. So I'm going to let these guys introduce reptilians, and we'll go from there. All right.
Well, before we get to reptilians, his specific question was about vampires and werewolves in the royal line, and yes, especially the British royal line, there is stories going very far back that they may very well have werewolf blood in them, and one of them at least one of them was actually a werewolf. It was Mad King George. Mad King George ruled in 1760 to 1820. which would make him the king that we rebelled against, the Americans.
Yep.
Um, he had what, I don't know how to pronounce this. Most likely, he had this condition, porphyria, I think is how you pronounce it,
Oh yeah,
which
okay, yeah.
is the one that basically makes you look like a werewolf or a vampire. You grow, you
The
just
hairy one.
your skin gets pale. You're not very, you can't go out in the sun. You can grow hair all over your body in weird places. Um, but there are people who thought that he was actually a werewolf because he quite literally did go mad. He had fits of intense rage that he would go through, where they would just call it madness back then. And they thought that that was him, his bestial nature. So, yes, there are conspiracy theories about the royals, especially the British royals. I'm sure there's others for all the royals, having werewolves quite literally within their bloodline. It is said also that King John, I believe it was, let me make sure, yes, King John of England was rumored to have become a werewolf after he died. So
Okay.
there's that.
Well, let me make a couple of corrections. Protheria actually is the speedy aging. It's those little kids that look like
Mm.
they're 80. That's
Here, I'll
protheria.
put it in the thing here.
Hypertrichosis is what you're talking about with the extra hair. But would rather use the more ancient word for hypertrichosis, which is called hirsute. And it's interesting because there are several people in the Bible, coming off a big biblical conversation, that are said to be hirsute, and also maybe even having hirsute vest or jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, I think there was some guy called John, and he was like a Baptist or something.
John the Baptist.
Seriously, I'm not kidding.
Now that one I've never heard before with him. He was a
No.
strange cat, that's for sure.
DeWolf just says no. Right. But yes, no, that the werewolf thing, that I've heard these rumors, is kind of interesting. I don't know what kind of validity there is to it, but it could be fun. But I think we'd probably more want to go toward the Nephilim thing is probably
Well,
where people want us to go, dude.
if you go with the Nephilim thing, there was the king Lycaon
Hmm.
of back in the Greek
Yep.
times,
Yep.
supposedly cursed by Zeus because of he's going to feed Zeus one of his own children or grandchildren or the like, and then
Yep.
he himself was turned into a wolf. So
That's right.
Lycaon, did that, and would he
All
then
his
have a
children
bloodline
too.
thereafter?
All his
Yes.
children as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So you got that bloodline concept of that wolf trait,
Yep.
going down through all the way from that would be early biblical around the deluge, before the deluge, in that realm, which of course we also know that realm of time frame as being that which the Nephilim were around.
Hmm.
So is that part of the same story? Is that just one of those aspects, a facet of the Nephilim story?
Well, the oldest version of that story we have is actually not Greek. It's actually an Akkadian story, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's kind of interesting because in that story, the god, Enki is the god who did that in the Mesopotamian story. He didn't make them a wolf. He made the father and their entire house have the what was the word they used? Had the I guess the tastes of a wolf. Well, what they meant was the hunger of a wolf. So it's
Okay,
not, they
yeah,
don't
yeah.
actually talk to them about them being wolf-like in appearance, but that they became cannibals is really what it was talking about. And then, of course, if you go talk to an archaeologist or an anthropologist specifically, they would tell you that this is talking about a tribe of people in that area that had become cannibalistic for whatever reasons. That's how they usually whitewash everything because that's what they do. But it's interesting that by the time that story got into the Greek era, they had become actually the wolf aspect became into it, and then as we move forward in time, it becomes this wolf-like creature, this hybrid creature, this werewolf. It's very interesting the werewolf if you track the progression of this story and how it came to modern Hollywood.
Oh yeah, gotta love them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And then on the other hand, you have the vampire part of that, and
Mhm.
yeah.
there were several different kings like Vlad,
Vlad.
and Vlad and several of the other queens of that area, at Austro area, in which they would bathe. Some of them would bathe in blood. Some would drink blood. They were trying to either capture some youthfulness or some other crazy thing, that they were doing. I'm sure you've got some information tucked away in your brain on that time frame, Chester.
Say that again. I was doing a search real quick. Say it again.
Oh, the vampiric concepts of from Vlad and the other
Oh,
princesses that
sure.
would, bathe in blood and the like.
Oh yeah. Well, I touched a little bit on the vampirism stuff and how it is a worldwide phenomena. Why are you coming out as a? Because I'm in Japan, right? Damn it. All right, fine. I'll just go back to vampire. I because I did spell that right. But no, vampire, of course, has been around for a long time, and the vampire we have today is coming out of the stories of the Aoshi and the Celtic stories over time, and eventually you had Bram Stoker, who took a lot of those stories as they had developed over the centuries, and he created his story. Bram Stoker, and of course we do know that he spent some time in Transylvania, and he probably picked up some of their local lore as well. And that's what gave us this modern Hollywood image. And understand, I use the word Hollywood a lot, and I simply mean movie making. Okay.
Yeah.
But now, if we talk about Vlad himself, now Vlad was, of course, his father was the Great Dragon. They were part of he was a House of the Dragon, and they were having a real big problem dealing with the Muslims, which is
Mm-hmm.
nothing new.
Yeah.
Old hat, I guess. And he was desperate to deal with the Muslims, and he decided that one of the most effective ways he could was just to terrify them. He took on a campaign of
Yes.
terrorism against them, and it was very successful for him. And one of the things he did was he would take all the captured soldiers from a battle, and he would literally impale them on a stake and put them along the road line like the old Romans used to do, and so that everywhere you go, you see these hanging corpses that have had a stake pushed through their body from the ass to the mouth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
which is a terrifying thing. And he was meant to terrify the Ottomans, right? The Muslims.
And it worked.
And it worked very well for him. Now, the whole vampirism thing came out of this because it had nothing to do with blood whatsoever. We don't have anything like the Bathory stories where she would bathe in virgin blood because she wanted to stay young, right? We don't have, there's no connection at all. The reason was that the vampire thing got attached to him was because of his absolute bloodthirstiness in battle and his brutal
Mm-hmm.
nature where he had zero mercy, and then Bram Stoker taking that's absolutely terrifying character and applying him to the Irish vampire mythology. So the creation of Bram Stoker's Dracula is where the connection of vampire and Vlad Tepes came into be, actually.
Well, it's interesting how much blood in pretty much every major culture has so much power in it. Speaking of bloodlines and this and vampires, and how many dark, even today, there's still dark rituals you can do with blood to try
Hmm.
and make yourself more youthful or curse an enemy or whatever, all sorts of different stuff, right? Most
Yeah.
ancient magic was really blood magic. And it's interesting how easy it is for people to go from him using a very brutal set of tactics just to terrify his enemy to leave him alone, basically. That's all he
Hmm.
wanted. To he drinks the blood of these people. Like how fast our minds jump from one thing to another.
Hmm.
Um, it's just an interesting, and it makes me wonder with a lot of these bloodline stories and a lot of the, how these people, some of them supposedly had miraculous abilities and things, how much of that is obviously just hyperbole like that was to try and coax a story, make a story more appealing,
Hmm.
when in reality the Vlad story is pretty awesome by itself. It doesn't need
It
much
is.
work. He
Yeah.
was a very
Yeah.
interesting man.
And consider the fact that now talking about bloodlines too. So you've got Vlad and you've got Elizabeth of Bathory, who we
Hmm.
just kind of vaguely mentioned.
Yeah.
Imagine now she had various children. She already had children, and so those children, of course, had other children and the like, and they eventually became prince and princesses, and kings and queens throughout the land. Anyway, Boleslav of Warsaw, I believe he was one of the princes there. And of course, once again, still very much rulers of areas. Okay, so that's where you had this idea. Well, if she did that, was she doing something to gain power, and was there power, and did her bloodline continue on to keep these things going? And just like Thundara was saying, we have this fanciful and romantic idea that, oh yeah, well, because of that, she had. I mean, she got maybe she even got the power, and she used blood for something, and that then went down through successive generations to make sure that they're always stronger, and they were in power over a bunch of
Sure.
people. But in reality,
She's just a
it's
nutter.
just the fact that well, going along the bloodline theory, in reality, those children married other people within a certain status. And then that certain status also remained high, and then they ended up in positions of power. It's not, you don't need any magic there for that
That's
to
true.
happen.
That's true.
But
Now, Comic
magic
Book
is far
Bob
more
here,
fun.
it is more fun. But Comic Book Bob here says he learned those tactics from the Turks themselves. He lived with them for years as a royal prisoner. Yeah, I believe it was part of some treaty his father had made, and he was like a royal hostage. Yeah. Kate Blonde says 5 likes. Oh wow, we need more likes, guys. Please hit those like buttons, and of course, we appreciate that. We appreciate all the subs we get as well. But hitting that share button helps us out a lot. We'd love that. Thank you very much for reminding me, Kate Blonde, because I do get lost in these things. She was probably inbred. Matthew says, "Yeah, no, she's just a nutter. She's just a crazy person. She was getting older, and she couldn't deal with it, and she probably read some old occult things, or maybe even some Mithraism, and had decided that she was going to do something like that. And it was going to help her, and it didn't help at all. She ended up literally getting bricked into a wall. Wonderful. But you know, it is a kind of a
Well, they had to stop the vampire, Chester. They
they
had to
did.
stop the vampire.
They did. They did. And I'm not going to go into the vampire here because that's not really what we're talking about. But it is these are interesting little things that have touched up throughout history. These interesting characters for sure. And Vlad the Impaler has become eternally attached to the vampire, which in truth there is no connection to vampire at all with him. That is Bram
Mhm.
Stoker's doing completely. But it's all well and good. I think it's made him famous. I mean, we still know who he is. Think about how many other
Yep.
brutal tyrants there were that we don't know anything about. More, at least the average person doesn't. There is an interesting little connection I want to mention about Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and to myself actually, and in doing so, to show how connected we are. Now, in Turkey, they will call a chief or a lord more like a chief. They will call them a bey, right? And if you go to Mesopotamia, they'll use some similar sounding variation of the word. We can also see this word is still used today in India and certain parts of the western side of China. Now it's interesting because you can also see this word bay coming all the way up into Norway, where my family is, because I am a boucher or a bus or a bush, a forest, not
Mhm.
bush today, but a forest. And B, my Buzz B or Buzz Bay, Bush Bay, is the same thing, meaning chief, right? So it's very interesting that this simple little name epitaph to show a chief bloodline or chief clan bloodline that can be traced all across the map. This single word still survives in our language in some form. In English, it only survives as a suffix to my family name. But I just think it's very interesting. It shows a connection between us, right? When that wondering exactly how did things actually path themselves historically. But anyway, you know what I mean?
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
Speaking of bloodline,
Wasn't
oh, go ahead.
Vlad pushing away the Turks?
Yes, he
Hmm.
was. That's right. That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I really, really want to talk about the Nephilim now.
Go ahead. My boy Chester has got a Nephilim fetish right now. He needs to fulfill it.
Yes. Well,
The
because come
Nephilim,
on,
the
we're talking
Nephilim in
about
the bloodlines.
bloodlines. We got to talk about the Nephilim because it's a
Hmm.
major part of this conversation, guys. It is TFT, right?
Oh yeah.
Of course, here I'm showing you a picture, an image of Goliath, and I don't know if you guys know this, but there is actually a tomb of Goliath, and they've never dug it up,
Hmm.
but it is a big old hill. But so we know where he's buried, actually, or at least we think we know where he's buried. But From this story, but of course, Goliath, and I'm not going to get into all the biblical stuff. I mean, DeWolf can if you'd like, but he's coming from a bloodline of giants, right? When we talk about Nephilim, of course, we're still stuck with the Bible, but then again, the whole world is stuck with the Bible, guys. Whether you're
Yes.
taking them from the Greek stories or from the Egyptian stories or what have you, they're all the biblical stories. They're all the same thing, right? So the Nephilim, of course, are coming out of the 200, and they're coming out of Samael and his lieutenant Azrael and the other 198 of them that were sent to as watchers to oversee, and they broke their vows and they went and started sleeping with ladies because they wanted to have the luxurious life, and they taught them all kind of things like magic and how to create hybrid genetic monsters and etc etc. Wonderful book, Enoch. If you've never read it, go have a look at it. And of course the Bible
Hmm.
still, the actual King James Bible still has some touches to those original stories are still there, but the book of Enoch is a much better one to read if you really want to
Boy,
get into
I'm
that.
sure they I'm sure they learned their lesson quickly after that.
You would think so, especially seeing as
After,
they're
hey, let's go down there
supposedly,
and
well, they're
let's
supposed to be
let's
still
mingle with all
chained.
these women. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, yeah,
And
don't
then
do
once they
that.
do that for a while, then starts the nagging and the yelling and
Yeah, I know, right? But Of
sorry.
course, the Watchers are supposedly imprisoned in Sheol to this day. But
Yep.
Now that is where the Nephilim is coming out of, right? Now, whether you call them
Yes.
Nephilim, the Raphaim, the Anahim, the Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them, right? They all are coming out of this same root story.
And
And
even just call them the giants.
You just call them the giants, some would call them angels, right? Others
Hmm.
would call them space travelers, come down to Earth looking for gold and genetically creating man to be their slave. But it's
I
all the
thought those
Hmm.
same.
were
It's all
small
the
little
same
people.
story, huh?
I thought those were small little people, little leprechauns were looking for gold.
They could be that too, dude. They're it's all the same stuff, right? It's just the different cultures, color on top of it. The stories are the same. But the Nephilim, of course, are very interesting because these days, when we talk about bloodlines, we know that all the royals of Europe are connected through the Babylonian houses, and we know the Babylonian houses were built, as far as the royalty, were coming out of the push into Jerusalem, the building, the initial building of Jerusalem, and of course this is
Hmm.
the Hyksos march out of Egypt. So they're all coming out of Egypt, and it's you say, wait, they're a bunch of white people, and that's Persia. Yeah, well, sorry to burst your bubble, but all the noble houses all across our Europe and Middle East and even into India were actually white dudes. I apologize
Yes.
for that, but actually, no, I don't. I don't apologize at
That's
all.
where uh that's where Mr. Hitler got his ideas from.
Yes,
Why
it
he
is
believed
exactly where he
in
got his ideas
Aryanism
from. The Aryan
so
race,
to
right?
such an extreme extent.
Yeah,
Yes.
but the royal houses were coming out of the Hyksos, and the Hyksos, of course, is Scythians, and they are
Hmm.
from the Celtic lands, France particularly. Now they did
Yes.
have opposition to them a little bit with the Shemshur, which we would call Druids these days, which are a little bit more north, but they didn't really put up much of a fight, to be honest. These Scythians, when they came down and they rocked their way through Mesopotamia into Egypt and took power, they were just like the Normans did when they came into Britain. They replaced every noble house with their own blood, right?
Hmm.
Right? So, I mean, all these people who built all those things are all Scythian in their base. And of course, eventually they ended up going back into Europe and building it into some amazingly mega powerful thing. And that's where these families are coming out of. Now,
They built you said they built their cities then on white blood.
yes, they did. They built it on their
Oh, you
own
know
blood.
what we
Yeah.
build this city on, Chester?
Rock and roll.
That is true. That is true.
That is very true. But the
Well,
point I'm trying to get to after this long, this muddled point I'm trying to make is the fact that they all it seems so, at least at one point. Now, do they all still believe this? I don't know. But at one point, if you read some of the books and writings, they believe that they are the bloodline of the Nephilim, right? They
Yes.
think they are. Even today, I think there are certain members of the royal houses that believe they have a privileged special blood in them. And that's what brings about the conspiracy theories about them. And then, of course, we have to understand, are the Nephilim reptilian? I would say not a chance,
No.
but that would be my point.
You're not David Icke either, though.
I'm not David Icke. No, I'm not.
Well, it is interesting that they would think that they would call them, they would say they derive their lineage from all the way back to them, because
They
in the
do,
Bible the Nephilim are called the sons of God.
of
Um,
course.
Different interpretations of what that means, but that's what it is. The word, the verbiage, or the
Hmm.
the words. Look, goodness gracious, that are in there. The actual verbatim words are sons of God when you translate it from the
Yeah,
Hebrew.
yeah,
Uh,
they're angels. Yeah,
Yeah, so most
Now, part
likely
of the
people take that to mean that they were angels that commingled with humans, and obviously that was forbidden, and they were punished, and da 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 da.
that's right.
But the descendants were still mortal, so they were allowed to continue living on Earth.
Well, now
Um,
now we get into
some
Noah
of
and
them,
such, but whatever.
yes, but it's interesting because there are even still, even after the accounts of giants in
Hmm.
the Old Testament. You mentioned one Goliath, but there's also the land of Canaan was occupied by men that the Hebrews called giants. That's what they told them they were, and God
Well,
told them to go kill them anyway.
they said they
Um,
felt as being ants unto giants is what they said. They
yes,
considered themselves that small.
and that would be more evidence biblically of some form of Nephilim like creatures.
Hmm.
Just besides the mention of them in Genesis.
Well,
So it
we
seemed
also
like
have
they survived in some.
we also have
Go ahead.
mentions of giants that are connected to this conversation directly, by the way, over
Hmm.
in China. Of course, this is
Yep.
before it became China. Actually, it was with Three Kingdom time. But a lot of people, if you go read your little textbooks, those little textbooks will tell you that the Great Wall of China was built to keep out the Mongols. Well, no, there's a little teeny stretch of wall that was built for the Mongols. The rest of
Hmm.
the hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of wall were built way, way before that period, a long time ago. And matter of fact, if you go read the old stories and you see why did they build these big giant walls, what could possibly be the purpose? Well, they were protecting themselves from giants. That's why they built
Yeah,
them.
that's no
And
Hadrian's Wall. Yeah.
no, Hadrian's walls across Britain. I'm talking about China.
No, but I mean the
God,
size of it. The size of Hadrian's Wall wasn't gigantic because the Picts were not gigantic.
that's true. And the ones over in
True.
China, of course, are ridiculously huge. And their stories, the original ones. I'm not talking about the ones that were built in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. I'm talking about the ancient ones built thousands of years ago, which is the major walls that were made at that time. They were protecting versus giants. And the interesting little thing that those main walls where they were sitting on a plain, and that plain in Chinese is called the plain of Gog and Magog, or Gog
Hmm.
Magog, right? And of course, that takes us right back to biblical stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is something interesting as you piece all this together, and I'm going to get back to your modern thing here. That the Nephilim created the giants, and they had all their problems and issues. You have Noah and Abraham and all these other people that then become what God says, these are my people, right? And he puts them in Jerusalem. Well, he does that, and in doing so, he has them attack and kill out the Canaanites and the giants, right?
Hmm.
That's right.
David slew Goliath. So now you get the Jewish people here who got rid of those giants. Now, if there's giants still around and they have descendants, is it not kind of interesting how the globalists, if they are then descendants of this bloodline, believing they're part of the Nephilim, believing they're part of the giants, why it seems that these global people are always at odds with the Jews,
Because
right?
they're Saturnist, dude.
Yes.
You're going a completely different direction.
I know,
Going back
but
to the original,
it's the
where
answer.
you have the Jews killing off the giants. So you got a war between God's people, the Jews, and the Nephilim people, the giants, and the descendants thereof. So you have the modern bloodlines at war with the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And we see that constantly going on with the anti-Semitism stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, they are enemies, and then they're not enemies. They're the same. You know how they talk? A lot of people like to, at least when I was younger, they talked about it a lot more than they do now. But you know, the 12 tribes, the lost tribes of Israel. Well,
Hmm.
the thing is, dude, a lot of the infighting and stuff, if you look at it politically, is just different Israeli or different Hebrew tribes fighting against each other, dude. Really.
Yes.
It's not as they're not separated actually, because the Scythians became the Hyksos in Egypt, and of course we call them the Hebrew now in English. They are Hebrew, and they ended up splitting off, sometimes amiably and other times not, and ended up building their own kingdoms all over Babylon. Some of the Arabic earlier, they were more primitive, but some of those earlier Arabic nations. Now, I'm not talking about the really old ones. I'm talking about the later ones. The Greeks, etc., etc. These are all founded by these same Hyksos that went out with all the gold of Egypt and went and founded themselves, and then started fragmenting. And then as time went by, centuries, even millennia went by, they started just tearing at each other, and they're still doing it, right? Whether they know it
Well,
or
they
not,
were no
they're
longer
still doing
considered
it.
the same, though.
No,
By that point, they
they're
were no
not,
longer considered the
but
same.
they
The Greeks
are
and Jews
though.
were completely different.
But they are though, right? In the end, they are,
No,
and they might not know
no,
it, but they are.
no. And the reason why goes back to where I started this off from, and that was power base, right? The power base of the Greeks changed to a different religion, right? The Jews now have a different religion. They have different ways of thinking and doing things. You know, and using your way, which I do like your way.
Mhm.
It means that we are all created of the one thing, and we're all one humanity under one
Oh,
God.
screw that, dude! I'm a
That's
Shem
awesome.
Shahur. I am not no damn Hyksos. No way, dude. Screw that.
On But when you start breaking apart and being apart from one culture from another, that's why you have the different cultures that are in Asia versus the ones in Europe and the like.
Yeah. Now, and I'm joking because I'm just as much as a mix of it as everybody else is. But actually, Matthew says, Chester, Mormons believe that Native Americans are lost Jewish tribe. Well, I'm just curious, Matthew, have you ever noticed how the word Mormon and moron are so closely so close to each other? It's so.
You be nice to the Mormons. They're good people.
I just play it, dude. Actually, I got a bunch of Mormon friends. But see, the thing, Mormons have a great sense of humor, though.
Yeah, they
They do
usually just laugh it
much
off.
more than other people, actually.
That is true.
But yes, I know they do say that, and now that brings us. Now, we're not getting into the David Icke thing, and that's fine because
I
David
was
Icke is.
trying.
I know, but he's an absolute nutter, dude. But you
Yep.
know what we are, we're very much dealing with bloodlines, and I think we need to let's bring it back since we can't get away from it. Let's go back to the source of this, all right, and talk about the sons of Noah, because from a biblical point of view, and understand that most of the people on this planet are have a biblical believing, whether it be the Muslim take, or even, and understand most of you don't have any clue at all what Buddhism is or Hinduism. You guys don't know. Most people have no clue at all. Trust me, it's
Hmm.
not very different. It's really not. They have the same
No,
stories you have. They just have they have their eyes are
it even
thinner.
has the same golden rule with
Yeah,
Christianity and
yeah,
Buddhism.
yeah.
Exact same. Treat people the way you
Uh,
want to be treated.
but my point being that uh, speaking biblically is simply because of our culture, but it is not unapplicable to the rest of the planet because it is actually. So let's go back to Noah and his sons, because if this story has validity, which I don't think so. I believe there was a flood, and I think there were many people who survived. I don't believe in a single family believe. I don't believe that at all. But you can believe that all you want. That's fine. But let's go from the point of view that this story is true. Let's just take that. And how then did the Nephilim continue? Because we know that they do. The Bible says the Nephilim continued. How do we
Hmm.
get the black peoples and the Indian peoples and the Asian peoples, etc., etc.? How did these things all come to be from a biblical point of view?
Environment.
Okay, then you're not helping
Um,
George. Not helping George.
That's a good starting point.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, George.
It was the environment. Uh, More sun would darken the skin. Less sun would make the skin pale. No sun at all would make the skin white, bleach white. Um, Environment of sand and dirt would cause the sinuses to grow. Um, there's environment of shale and rock would cause the feet to become the soles of the feet to become more um, callous. It's an environment. Everybody started off the same,
This
and
is
as humanity split because of the Tower of Babel
mhm.
breaking apart and everyone speaking in different languages, humanity split apart, and as they split apart, they move through different terrains of the earth,
Yeah.
and they
Th-
become different tribes.
yes, this is Darwinistic adaptation. I get it. But I'm.
But,
How does that explain the
but
Nephilim? How does that explain the Nephilim, which is what we're talking about?
well, the Nephilim weren't then
Hmm.
in those times. The Nephilim were engraved or entrenched in humanity,
They were all
and
wiped
they
out,
moved
though. Only Noah and his sons and their wives existed.
right. But before that
Well,
happened,
there's actually a very simple explanation for how the Nephilim could have came back or survived, or however you want to word it.
Hmm.
One of the wives could have been one, for all we know. The wives aren't really talked about in great detail.
They're
And it
not.
wasn't
Yeah.
like just being a Nephilim was a bad thing. It wasn't their fault. That's how they were. So it very well could have been one of Noah's sons' wives could have been a Nephilim, and it just kept on that way.
Well,
Um,
one of his sons was a little bit of a rabble rouser, though.
mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I was trying to get at the specific son Ham, because I've heard
Mhm.
a lot of Christian theologians try to say that the African tribes come from Ham.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I'm not very familiar. Let me see if I can find it actually. I'm not very familiar with it, why they say that specifically, but let's see.
He's checking it.
I am. The
he's
Curse of
checking
Ham,
it.
what it's called. Curse of Ham is the misnomer known as the Curse of Ham, is more accurately known as the Curse upon Canaan. Ham's son that was imposed by the biblical patriarch Noah. The curse occurs in the book of Genesis and concerns Noah's drunkenness and the accompanying shameful act perpetrated by his son Ham, the father of Canaan. The controversies raised by this story regarding the nature of Ham's transgressions and the question of why Noah cursed Canaan when Ham had sinned have been debated for over 2,000 years. The story's original purpose may have been to justify the subjugation of the Canaanite people to the Israelites, but later in centuries, the narrative was interpreted by some Christians, Muslims, and Jews as an explanation for black skin, as well as a justification for slavery. Nevertheless, most Christians, Muslims, and Jews now disagree with such interpretations because in the biblical text, Ham himself is not cursed, and race or skin color is never mentioned.
No.
Now, I have heard that before. Now that I read this, it's been a while since I've also heard people say that the dark skin comes from Cain. The curse that God played upon Cain's head actually turned his skin dark. And that's the biblical, like a version of the story. Obviously, we know now that it was just like he said from sunlight and things. But um, the curse of Ham I have heard of before. Now that I read this again, and it is an interesting take on it that maybe that is because according to the scripture, it was only eight. There was only that those families that survived. It wasn't very many people.
Hmm.
Um, so how did we get such diversity? Everybody's
And
favorite
then
word now
George's
from
adaptation comes into play. Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
But it's very simple. It. I don't think there's any Christian dogma out there that has any merit that denies adaptation
Hmm.
exists. Obviously, humans are capable of adapting to their
Of
environment.
course. Yeah.
So that's all you really need on that one.
Yeah.
But the
I
Kane one's actually very interesting.
I do have a
I've read a lot of
caveat.
people.
I do have a
Go ahead.
caveat to that. A Cain
Mhm.
thing. I'll just add real quick. But first, I just want to see how I want to show you how sad the world is today. I did a search for Noah, and this is what I got.
Oh no.
It's ridiculous, right? I had to go
Hmm.
literally biblical Noah to get it. I mean, that's anyway. But
Right.
actually, if you go
Oh
back and
yeah,
you yeah, if you go back and you read the older stories coming out of the Mesopotamian stories, whether they be Akkadian or Assyrian, Sumerian in some cases, even, or Babylonian, or even some Hittite stories, and you look at those, they actually tell the story of Cain and Abel far more clearer than the Bible does. And what had
Hmm.
happened was that no, Abel was these two sons were actually in the original stories, they were raised by Adam, but they were not his children. They were the children of a god. They were Nephilim. Right. Now I know I'm not going to get into the biblical argument, but just this is what the original story says. Okay, or the oldest one we have.
What?
Just let me finish it. Now, so basically, this god asked two of his sons to raise one each and to see what could become of this new creation, right?
Hmm.
And Abel was taken up by a prince god that was in charge of husbandry and all those kind of things like that. So he was taught how to keep sheep and cattle and all those kind of things. The other one was taken. The other son was more in charge of our agriculture and stuff. And what happened is when in the story it says that from their home a meat was brought that the gods who were on earth had not had in a long time, and therefore the god who was in who Abel was under was making it a surprise, and Abel was part of it, and he let Abel actually present it to the gods, and they were so thrilled and happy that they had this meat, which we would call lamb, which was from their home. Right, to have it since
Hmm.
not having it for so long, that they rejoiced and they put him on his shoulders and jumped around with him on his shoulders. And it wasn't that they didn't like Cain's presentation; it just wasn't interesting to them because they literally had not had lamb in so long, and they were so excited about it. And this is where his anger came from, and he killed his brother. And what happened
Right.
was that at that time, in as far as these stories say, the gods didn't kill anybody. There was no death penalty. And therefore, even though he had killed, they weren't going to kill him for his crimes because they didn't do that. But there's some punishment needed to be meted out, and it doesn't get into it gets into a marking, but it isn't very specific. But he and his entire house, which by this time he had a huge family, right, were kicked out, and they were kicked into the wandering lands. Now, if you read other
Hmm.
stories about, well, what is the Wandering Lands? Where are the Wandering Lands? Well, it's Asia, and it's more specifically the
Yep.
East Asia. So, if you want to talk about an actual mark of Cain, according to the based on the stories themselves, well, then the Asian eye would be the mark of Cain.
Yep. I know. I'm not. I
Sorry,
fully agree with you. That's probably what it is. But there are people who have twisted it into just basically because they're racists
sure,
and they want to demonize black people. That they're the marked of Cain, and they're not worthy of going to heaven, and da 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 da.
yeah, yeah,
It's one of the just like the curse of Ham has been used to justify things like slavery and things of this against other races.
sure,
Same idea. The curse of Cain, the mark of Cain, is to used to justify it. But it's interesting. You go back to Noah, like you
hmm,
were saying, and how blood goes all the way back to Noah, and the generations of Noah is what some people call it. Um, the interesting thought that I was having here while you were just talking about that is when we were talking earlier about how stories all seem to be very similar, or at least have very, very similar themes, right? Even back to
the core
Bloodlines.
is the same, yeah, yeah,
Right. There is now we have for a fact, in fact, they have found what would be one human ancestor evolutionarily. If you're going to talk about evolutionary theory,
hmm,
they pretty much have come
If
to
you're
the
gonna,
conclusion that there was what they call an evolutionary Adam, and this is where humans came from. This is where Homo sapiens came from this one guy. Um, so now they have quite literally, even in science, at least not everybody agrees with this theory, obviously, but in this particular theory, found Adam. The old stories have talked about an Adam or an Adam like figure since forever, and the bloodline runs all the way up through Noah, all the way up through everybody else. they found Adam evolutionarily through genetics. And when we were talking about things like the power in the blood, and I was saying that's basically genetics, there's more to it than that, in fact. Blood actually does do all sorts of things we're discovering now you can do with blood to help heal other people.
Mm,
You can do with body parts and things of this nature, like stem cells. That comes from, we get those from all different things, but you can use those to heal things we couldn't heal before. So there is power within our bodies that we are just now starting to tap, and that's
mm,
what a lot of these rituals were supposed to do. It's interesting how the ancients just kind of knew that. They just knew it. Like, they didn't have the
yeah.
science we have today, or at least we don't think they did. So it's interesting how much they were able to just discern just from that.
Yeah, and if you believe the stories of the Nephilim, and then
Hmm.
you understand what they say they taught them, then you would understand the Nephilim had an understanding of high technology, and they
Yeah.
taught them all the things they knew, including magic. There is a
Yes.
point here being made by Matthew that I think is interesting. We don't have time to get into it deeply, but he says, Chester, could it be that different races develop from different but similar primates? As far as evolutionary science goes, which is kind of a comedy unto itself, but if you, I would suggest go read or I think you can even watch some, but go read some of the works by Lloyd Pye. Now, Lloyd Pye is he passed away a little while ago from cancer, unfortunately, but he was an old dude. But Lloyd Pye has got some very interesting ideas, and it's very, very well researched, actually. Now, some of his stuff was seen as a bit controversial, but I don't. I'm not talking about that alien stuff that he did as well. I'm just talking about his genetics work and what he suggests and is put forward. And he's not alone, by the way. Is that the if you look at the human, it's really deep DNA talk. So I mean, if it might be boring to you, but if you look at our DNA and you look at say a chimpanzee has a certain number of chromosomes, whereas we have two less, right? And it's weird, right? You say if we're an evolutionary jump above the chimp, then we should be more sophisticated, right? But yes, yet our DNA says it's less sophisticated. Well, interesting thing, as we've studied genetics and come to understand it more and more, and in truth, we're just touching the surface of it, but that we started to understand it. They did find the other two chromosomes, but they have been stitched on to the first two chromosomes. So the first two chromosomes in humans are double tall in a way, meaning there's two chromosomes stitched together to make a single chromosome layer.
It's
And
amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And then the question comes now, well, who stitched it? Because it's stitched, it's not natural, and there's not many geneticists that would come out and speak about but there are a few, and they say very clearly that human DNA looks like it's been tampered with, right? And that
Yep.
brings up a really interesting question. And Lloyd Pye approaches this in a very serious, very scientific way. And I'd suggest you go read it because it's fascinating. Yeah.
You would say tampered. I would say created specifically,
Either
differently.
however you want to put it, right? Because you got to
Functionally,
keep in
it's the
Yeah.
mind
same thing.
it is, and of course you're coming at it from a King James Bible, a version of it, which would be, snap your finger, create the universe.
You don't know me.
Whereas, well, okay, I don't know you, but the old stories don't talk about these were not infallible gods of, omniscient things. They did stupid
Right.
things. They raped, they murdered, they cheated on each other, they died. Right? And they say themselves, all the original origin stories all say that the gods, the aliens, the people, visitors, or whatever the culture calls them, they changed a creature that already existed into a servant for them, right? And the DNA
Right.
seems to want to be acknowledging that, and that's kind of interesting, I think.
What it doesn't say
Hmm.
is that we have seen evolution. And that's one of the biggest things that's going on. You can't find, that missing link is still missing. And overall, these concepts, like what Matthew brings forward here, the different primates evolving,
Hmm.
and we're one of those branches, and the other branches have failed. Along that line comes Neanderthals. Along that line comes
Sure.
Cro-Magnons and the like. And so they thought those were different versions of
No,
men.
I think he was talking about speciation, actually, dude. I think he was talking about the
Um,
races. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, he wasn't,
No, I'm talking about
because what he was
Matthew.
talking about was evolution of similar primates, right? Such as monkeys and chimpanzees, as we know. But well, of course, the theory is that there's stages of these chimpanzees, monkeys, these primitive people that are different branches along the way,
Mm.
and that the Asians are a different branch completely.
Yeah, yeah,
Whites
yeah.
are a different branch completely, and the blacks are a different branch completely. And the problem with this theory, there's various different theories, philosophical as well as scientific. The scientific one states that we just haven't found that, and we're more similar. There's one human race still. There's not these different branches that we can
Yeah.
find, including all those missing links that would be required. Even going back to Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, they actually are just part of the human race, just different types of people. Once again,
Yeah.
because you've got everybody from a mini me to, and they're still the human race.
It's true.
That is a problem, because if you do indeed say that they can be different branches, then those different branches in a natural setting, natural selection, means that the strong survive. And it does that one of those branches is stronger than the other, such as that we, of course, would have somehow killed off the Neanderthals under that concept. If that's the same way as now, then that means that there's a group, white, Asian, or black, that are from a different branch, and one branch is better than the other, and that's racism. From a philosophical point of view, it gives credence to racism. And I personally don't believe that. I don't believe that that's the way God would have created things, and that he would have made things to where we were all equal coming from one man.
It's really interesting you say that because the official anthropology of the day actually is quite racist, and it is in this way.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
No, I
The
don't. I'm agreeing
blacks
with
are
you.
coming out of the Homo erectus. The
Hmm.
whites are a combination of Homo erectus and Neanderthal and some unknown thing we haven't found yet. And the
Yep.
Asians are coming out of Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and Decinovan. And everything else is just a mixing of things as it went along. Like, for instance, the Native Americans. A lot of people think the natives that you would see, the Indian, right, is the ones that came there first. Well, they're not. The Clovis people came there first, and they came from Europe. They were white people, right?
Yeah.
And when the Asians came in, those Asians and those whites mixed, and they give you what you have today. And as a matter of fact, you can see it very clearly, right? Not only in
Hmm.
their appearance, but also in their language. They're obviously coming out of an early Jomon type of people, which are, you could look at the Japanese, for instance, because they're obviously linked. They have a very Japanese look to them, but yet they have prominent noses and brows and things like that that are coming out of the Caucasian, right? But if you look at their languages, you can find actual still words today standing that have same meaning as they do in Japanese. So, I mean,
Yeah, there's too many similarities.
it's extremely similar. But this is the standard standing anthropology as we are today, as far as how they look at it. So, you know,
Yeah, I don't like those guys.
well, I'm just saying that's the official, right?
But it's interesting
Yeah.
because from that point of view, the Nephilim, the sin that they committed would be meddling with, as we're talking about, the bloodline.
Yeah,
They did create a race of humans or a group of humans, a breed of humans, whatever you want to call it, that would be superior because of the divine nature of the angel mixing with the fallen nature of man.
Now you're
Um,
meaning aliens when you say angel now, right?
well, I mean, they're technically all alien; they're not of Earth,
Oh, okay.
but um, but no, I that's what I mean. That's the one of the interpretations is that the angels, the before the because we don't really know scripturally the exact moment the angels fell that they became demons. We don't know when that happened. We don't know if it was before the foundation of the world or if it was during, somewhere in the middle. We don't actually know. It doesn't say. It just says that it happened, and we know that it happened.
hmm
Um, so we don't know. Maybe it was at that moment. Maybe that was one of the things that led to the fall. We don't know. So there's some interpretations of it that say that they were angels that intermixed with humans, and they were still angels at that point. They hadn't fallen to become demons. Um, so that would have been their sin. That would have been the thing that they did that was so evil. If God, in like in the wolf's view, made man equally perfect insofar as at the time Adam was perfect before sin and blah blah blah. And then they meddled with it and they screwed around with it. God would be very angry with that. Obviously,
Mhm.
they meddled with His creation with authority they don't have. So that would make sense. That would make a lot of sense going back to the Nephilim and bloodlines. And one of the reasons God is very, scripturally speaking, very like, remember your bloodline, remember your history. He's constantly talking about it, the genealogies over and over and over.
Yeah.
It's a sinful thing to destroy your bloodline.
Yeah.
Um, in that respect. So that would be why the Nephilim were punished.
And just to add a little bit to that, if you go back to the older stories, particularly like say the Irish stories of the origin, same kind of same stories, right? What they
Mm-hmm.
say, they actually do make a connection, right? That those who were thrown out of heaven are the ones the criminals who were escaping. The dragon and his army and his followers thrown out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are the ones who came to Earth, and they are the Nephilim. I mean, not the Nephilim. They are the
Right.
Watchers, the 200. So the old Irish stories, particularly, are actually, even though they have nothing to do with the Bible, right? This is way before, way this is this is millennia before the Bible was written, right? By the way, but their
Mm-hmm.
stories are actually making a direct connection that the dragon and his followers are the Watchers, and they are the ones who meddled, and they were punished
You mean
again.
is that Tiamat?
No, that's a
Mm-hmm.
more of a Mesopotamian lore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because he's the one that
Interesting.
the
Well,
dungeon master was always trying to get the kids to
it's a
leave
female,
alone.
just so you know.
Oh,
Can
okay.
we? I'm going to change the subject real quick off of the Nephilim just for a
Hey, go
second.
ahead. Go ahead.
It's interesting that I don't know how many people know this, but there's obviously the old. It's kind of a conspiracy theory. It's partially true that everybody's related to Genghis Khan, right? Because he went through and raped
Well,
the whole world, basically.
a certain percentage is,
A
yeah.
large segment of the people is definitely has him as an ancestor. But there is 100%. This isn't even a conspiracy theory. It's pretty much accepted that pretty much any European is related to Charlemagne. Uh, Anybody who of European descent has Charlemagne as an ancestor somewhere in
Excuse
in
me.
their tree.
Are you accusing me of having any French in me at all, sir?
I am, unfortunately.
Oh, that's those are fighting words right there.
But Charlemagne was one of the good ones.
Now, are you going
And
back? back
that's an interesting thing to me because he we talk about conspiracies and things, and this is one that's kind of real. For a while, it wasn't even considered a conspiracy, but they've pretty much proven it, as far as I know, that every living European has some connection genetically, besides just being of the same ethnicity or whatever, to Charlemagne directly. Like you can find him on your family tree if you went back far enough. It could find all the way back to Charlemagne because he was pretty long time ago. But it's just an interesting thing because some of this stuff does turn out to be true, be real.
Yeah.
but that's not a good story because the good story is that the bloodline is being used to keep the man down.
Yes, it is, and reptilians and everything. Um,
Yeah.
With
now,
reptilians.
the image I have on the screen right now, I think it's an interesting one, and I want to I want to interject this because I think it's interesting. When I've said this before, but when I was in college studying anthropology, I'm not no master of anthropology, guys. I was a student of it, right? But when I was studying at that time, everything was about Mesopotamia and Egypt. That was it, everything, right? But in
Hmm.
recent years, a lot of evidence has come forward showing that actually the oldest version of stories we have are actually in Ireland, oddly. I would have never guessed this, but it is how the scientific anthropological community is shifting, right? This is not fringe science, it's not theories, it's the actual mainstay anthropological community is doing this, right? And the interesting thing about that, if we look at their stories, they had a king. His name was Nuada. Now, he had many names depending on where in the Celtic lands he was being venerated. He's also called Tyr. Over in the Nordic lands, he's called Nud or Nudens or Lund or Lun. Of course, Lundun is the castle or fort or keep of Lun, who is Nuada, right? That's what that word
Hmm.
means. And the interesting thing about this is, of course, his story and talking about his escaping the flood and all those kind of things like that. Another name for him that you might recognize is Noah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And his, if you read his story when he came over, his story is the flood story, guys. It's interesting.
Is
Interesting.
this all in the Tuatha De Danann or
Oh, in all those writings and all the stuff. Yes, that's right. Yeah. The
okay,
origin
yeah.
stories, particularly. Yeah. But I mean, it's just very interesting that he was actually called Noah. It was one of his names. One of the pronunciations of his names was Noah. And if you read his story, he it is the flood story. It is absolutely the flood story. It's just a lot more fantastical and interesting, actually. And if you haven't read any of the Tuatha De Danann or any of the writings around that, which there's a lot, you should go check it out. It's pretty interesting. And like I said, the scientific community is putting a lot of effort into that right now, which is daunting because I've studied a lot of this stuff and whew, there's not enough. But they are really digging deep right now. So who knows where they'll end up with that. But I just thought it was an interesting little point to make.
Well, another thing that's very interesting is there's now a lot of evidence talking about a Darwinian view of how humanity became what they are, that the out of Africa theory is just not accurate. Um, we're finding just finds that are even older, according to carbon dating, which is its own topic, um, than anything we found in Africa to date.
Yeah,
So there
that's the
very well
problem.
could,
Yeah, that's the
yeah, it's a
problem.
big problem.
Yeah.
It very well could be that some of these stories are our ancient ancestors that we go back to were out of
Yeah.
Ireland for all we know.
Well,
Who
for
knows?
who
It's very
knows, yeah.
possible.
And of course the reason why they've made this shift, I think, I'm guessing here, but I think it's because in the past decade we've had a big team of geologists went out across the world and they proved there was a global flood 12,000 years ago. And now that
Hmm.
has become academic, and therefore now that thing that they have been forever denying and vehemently denying that there was a global flood. Now that they can't do it, I think some of them are trying to shift and now they're going to try to explain things. And maybe this is why they've been focusing on the Irish lore so much. I don't know. But it is interesting. The past decade has been incredibly interesting when it comes to anthropology. I know
Hmm.
that. They don't necessarily have a lot of it on the TV because maybe most people don't find history stuff to be that interesting. I don't know. I guess they'd rather talk about ancient aliens, I suppose. But the past decade has been an absolutely awesome decade when it comes to anthropology. You know.
It is interesting. It is interesting to watch how scientists, I use air quotes as hard as I can, um, they'll change the story very quickly, and they don't like to admit that they're doing that because you'll call them on it that they changed the story. That hey, you guys were wrong about this 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden, and then they'll pretend like they have all this knowledge, right? They act like a priesthood.
Mhm.
They have this arrogance about them, and then when they get proven, oh, that's wrong, they just keep moving on like it never happened. It's just interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, it's also a nice little interesting thing to add that they add to the story in the Tuatha De Danann, epics or sagas, is the fact that they weren't the only survivors, and humanity
Hmm.
had fallen into absolute despair and savagery and barbarism. And what they did is they because they survived fairly well intact, and they sent out as they got themselves established. It says that they sent out emissaries around, to the four corners of the earth. They say to
Hmm.
bring wisdom back to man. And we see this mentioned in other stories, later stories. It seems now, seeing as they're kind of saying these are the older ones. And it's very interesting. And if that's true, if this is the Noah and his the huge cadre he had with him, and they're the ones that started bringing it back. Now things start making sense. Why did we see civilizations pop up out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere? Well, it's because these dudes were going around and bringing information. Okay, this is how you do this, this, and this, and they were rebuilding what was lost. It actually
Right.
makes it, if you look at this as being a potential fairly factual, it actually
Hmm.
explains a lot of stuff after it,
Right. It
right?
would explain, like you said, just this the boom, and here's a civilization within 100, like not even 100 years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, these people can do all this stuff. They all of a sudden they know agriculture, they know a little bit about water manipulation and all these masonry, when before they were just Stone Age, if that.
Hmm.
Tribes, just savages in every sense of the word, and all of a sudden it's just like a boom, an explosion of knowledge.
Yeah.
It does explain a lot of things. It's very interesting,
It does.
in
And
fact.
if you go
Well,
back to
that's
the Bible itself, DeWolf, maybe you can help us out with this, dude. There's actually in there a description of Noah's birth and what he looked like, and his father was quite put off. Could you explain to us what Noah looked like from a biblical point of view?
no.
No. Okay.
I've not. I can't say I dwelled upon that piece of
I see.
scripture.
Well,
I
basically,
do know. I mean, he was ridiculed for what he was doing.
yes, but
You
he
know.
was also distinctive in what he looked. One, he was a giant as well. And
Okay.
a bit, from biblical point of view, I'm not going extra biblical. I'm sticking right to the Bible. And he was, his hair was white, his eyes were light, and his father was very upset because it was quite obvious that one of the angels or gods, depending what culture you're reading this in, had laid with his wife and made a child, and he was quite put off. And he went to go talk to the boss and find out what the hell is going on and why this was being allowed. A lot of people seem to forget that in the Bible, the father of Noah is angry and pissed because his wife has had a child that is not his. Right?
Let me look that up.
Go right for it, dude. Have fun.
So another thing, though, that what Thundar was just talking about was this sudden increase in knowledge. That is a perspective if you believe that people, were savages and they were dumb and basically kind of evolved. The biblical story would say that everyone was smarter anyway in the first place,
Yeah.
and that knowledge was at hand to all people because of being created better than we are now. Which is against the more modern way of thinking, the progressive way of thinking, the evolution way of thinking, that we're always getting better, and that the older generations or further back into the past, we were we
Hmm.
were we were dumber, that we have more knowledge now, so we're better and smarter, and that it's going to continue going. That's actually flipped on its head. And the from the Bible's perspective is that we were better, and through sin we've fallen, and we're now in a fallen state,
Mm.
dumber than before.
That's interesting. Now, I think I wasn't expecting this to go so biblical on today's show, but it's all well and good because it absolutely stuck to Bloodlines the whole time. We didn't really tangent at all, hardly. So pretty cool, pretty
Yep.
good. But it is a Bloodlines conversation. It's not. It's just not the one I expected to be having, and it's not the one I prepared for. But anyway, because I was all David
Yes.
Iced up, man. I went and I watched like 3 or 4 of his documentaries. You know how hard it is to get through a David Icke
Oh
documentary?
no!
Oh
Yes, I
my,
do.
Chester.
Unfortunately, I unfortunately do 100% know how hard it is to get through his documentary.
Although I do find I see why people like him though. He's very charismatic, very interesting in stuff he's saying, and once again, as with the conspiracy theories, he's found kernels of truth and he's clinging to them, and then he's painting as he runs, naked. But because it's David Icke. But interesting conversation, and we've been here 2 hours, so we're definitely going to end this now, guys. But I enjoyed that a lot. That was a lot of fun. A lot of ideas came out, and I hope you guys in the chat enjoyed it as well. And keep in mind that we're doing this every week. We're having a lot of fun with it, and many of you were quite involved in the chat here. If you guys want to come sit up with us and talk, please do, man. My link's right down below. Just to tell me, Chester, I want to be on the show, and I'll put you on, dude. I mean, come on. Because if you're just too much of a pain, well, I'll just kick you out. It's easy enough, right? But I mean, come on in. Anyone's welcome. I'm serious. And come have a conversation and have fun, because that's what we're doing here. But I guess what we need to do to get today, guys, is get an ending statement from everybody, and then make a decision what we're going to do next week. So let's start with George, who's been very quiet. I do apologize. We kind of trampled over you here today, George, but it's the nature of the thing, I suppose. But George, you got any closing comments, man?
Yeah, there was no trampling. I saw the passion and everything that was going on. I learned a lot. I mean, a lot. Um, my closing statement for this is we could actually package all this up and make it into an audio book and distribute it all over the internet beyond the YouTube channel.
Oh, we could. I'd rather we do more research before we did something like that because this was kind of off the cuff. But yeah, of course you could. Yeah, people do it all the time.
Okay, and there's something more closer to this. It's too bad, Mothra wasn't real.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, dude.
I was ready. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, Mithra. And actually,
Mithra.
Mithra. I actually go study the cult of Mithra because it actually will explain a lot of the modern world to you. Actually, if you go and understand who the Mithrites were, or Mithrians, or whatever they call themselves. I think it was Mithrite would be more accurate. But if you go and study the cult of Mithra and and look at what they did and how connected they are to everything you think you know, it's very interesting reading, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a humdinger of a surprise for me.
Well,
All joking aside.
Joe King. Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment, dude.
We will get there.
We will get there. Let's go ahead, DeWolf, man. Give us your final thoughts, dude.
Well, as I started off with, and as we continued through this for a whole 2 hours, in that Bloodlines is about power.
Yeah.
From be it resources or anything else, influence and the like. Bloodlines are about power. From the Christian perspective, of course, I would have to say that being able to merge yourself into the bloodline of Christ just by accepting Him is that easy way of obtaining something within this world that's going to be the betterment of you.
Yeah.
From a otherworldly perspective, though, I could even say that you get yourself around mentors, which is, of course, what Christ is on the spiritual level. Get yourself around a mentor. Go find yourself a mentor and put yourself into their family, making yourself kin to them, if you will, so closely, and choose that person or people that have can be a benefit to you. Of course, it's going to be give and take, a benefit to you to better yourself, because power doesn't just come from something outside of us. Power comes from within. So either those two routes or both, that's what I think that you need to do to obtain a good, proper bloodline and have that power for yourself.
Awesome. Thundaro, sir?
My closing statement is actually another message of how important and how interesting this bloodline stuff is. The recent include back to the British royals. The recent addition to that family, Meghan Markle, is actually a British royal. She is a 17th cousin of Prince Harry. She is related genetically to King Edward III, direct descendant of him.
Dude, I'm probably under 10 connected to him. I'm really
17.
My point is I guarantee you they knew that before this marriage went forward. They still protect, even if it's to a small degree, because technically long story short, the British royal crown isn't a British royal crown anymore. They still, or English, I should say, they still protect that very fervently. It's a very important and powerful thing to make sure you understand where you come from, make sure you understand where you're going, and to protect your bloodline. I think it's something that's very interesting. And the fact that there's so many conspiracy theories around it, including the reptilian stuff, including the Nephilim stuff, and is a testament to how important it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Now, I would say good job today, gentlemen, because we stayed on topic really well. And it's hard in this conspiracy theory thing, man. It's hard to stay on topic, guys. But we did a really good job today staying on topic, and we covered a lot of ground, interesting ground. And I had a great time. I thought it was a lot of fun. And from my point of view on things is I'm not a stickler to anything because I know right well that I and we don't know anything. Therefore, for me, it's simply what's more interesting. So if I were to choose what I am, I shall be an Olympian. because the Olympians are cool. It's the same story, it's the same stuff, but it's just cool. So I'm going to be an Olympian. In the end, I do believe that in intelligent design, though. And that's all I think that really matters. But nevertheless, I guess the last thing we do before we start shilling out books, as we always do, and we appreciate you guys sticking around, is making a decision what the next week's TFT is going to be about. Now we got a bunch of you guys in here, so throw those ideas into the chat, please, as we sit here and discuss it. So what do you guys want to do next week? Let's see. So far we did Area 51, right? And then what did we do after that?
We did
Antarctica.
hidden. I think it was hidden history, ancient structures.
Hidden histories, which is basically focused on ancient structures. That's a huge category.
Yes.
And of course, today we did Bloodlines, which was a little bit more narrow conversation. That's probably why we stayed on topic better. So what would you guys like to do next week?
How about Antarctica?
Antarctica. Ooh, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Yeah.
That ties into multiple different conspiracy theories, including the one that is extremely popular right now, which is flat Earth.
It does.
Big time ties into it.
It does.
It does, yeah. But that also, unfortunately, is going to, even if I do my best to stay away from the Anunnaki, which I've done a good job in 2 shows of staying away from it, DeWolf, but I will just bring in the Egyptian version of it because that is directly connected. And then, of course, all the
That means I can't go to the Templars very easy, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can work it in. I have faith in you, dude. But no, Antarctica is very interesting. What do you guys think? You want to do Antarctica? Hollow Moon, I think, we should do an episode that is called Hollow Moon, Hollow Earth. And do those together. Because just Hollow Moon is a very short conversation, I think. But
I think at some point we also, if we're going to talk about the moon, we need to dive deep into the moon landing. And if it ever actually happened.
Yeah.
Regarding the moon, there's a new astronomer video where it shows a high-powered telescope zeroed in on the moon, and you saw scan lines.
Yeah, I've seen those as well. Yeah, those are interesting videos. Yeah.
And not only that, but when they zoomed in close on the sun, it wasn't heat; it was vibration.
We're gonna do I'm gonna do a quick little teaser for Antarctica. I actually like that idea because there is a lot of weird stuff with Antarctica. Yeah. And the fact is, pretty much every major country on the planet signed a treaty to keep Antarctica safe, to keep people off of Antarctica. That is weird. They don't ever agree on anything, but for some reason, they all agree on that. We're gonna get into that more next week when we do this.
Also, just before you guys go, regarding Antarctica, if you do more in-depth research, there is a connection between the Mountains of Madness and Antarctica and the conspiracy of Antarctica.
Yeah, H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah. Here comes the sun. Da 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 da. Now, Matthew says something kind of interesting. I don't know if I've actually heard of it before. He says, Chester, the Philosopher's Stones and their modern use by the rich elites. I've never even heard this conspiracy
He wants to get into a little alchemy, a little occult conspiracies.
Don't get me started.
That's a fun place. That's a fun topic.
Yeah, no,
the conspiracy of magic. That's what we'll call that episode. Magic itself.
Yeah. So we have
the Philosopher's Stone technology is actually real. I mean, they're able to create diamonds in a furnace, in a very small furnace. So
we'll get there.
Yeah. No, but there's a couple good shows. But
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, I think we're going to go with Antarctica because there's a good long conversation there, and I think I'm going to call it Atlantica.
Wait a minute. Hang on. That's a teaser for you.
It is.
That's
Cut
a
it
teaser.
out.
It is teaser.
Cut it
Cut
out.
it
Shut it down.
out.
Shut it down.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all very much. Let's get into our final bit here. Of course, with us, DeWolf and I, we are both writers on the Tales from Beyond the Gate project, and we appreciate all the people that have come and joined that already. But we need more. We need more people to go over and get that thing funded. That is a great book. $30. You're getting 160 plus pages. There's this killer art in there. You got John Dillard, who you see on the show, you've seen many times. You got Todd Mulrooney. He's working on all kind of projects. You got Kevin Stewart. You got Eric Weathers. I mean, etc. You got Manny from Good Dog Press as well. There's a lot of really good artists on there, and I say the writing is really good too. Actually, if I do say so myself. But I think it is, and they're fun, clever stories, and it's an anthology, so you get to see so many different things. And what you're doing is supporting this unknown talent and giving us an opportunity to be seen, so we can go into the future and do more things. Thank you very much, Matthew. He says it's a very interesting conversation. Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun. That's the good thing about conspiracy theories. You can have a pleasant debate about it and not really get heated and just have fun with it, right? That's why we're doing this. But thank you all. Definitely check out Tales from Beyond the Gate. And, of course, George here has a project of his own.
Joe King, one more day. Get it before it closes. One more day.
Sweet. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end, guys. Matthew says, Chester, wait, Chester, have you heard of Michael Sarian? Yes, I have. I've listened to a lot of his things. It's very, very interesting. To be fair, he's become a kind of a new age guru these days, which isn't as interesting to me. But if you go back to his older stuff, basically what he did was the same thing Zechariah Sitchin did. Zechariah basically took and translated the Mesopotamian stories. A lot of people say Sumerian, but actually he's taking from many cultures. He translated those directly, but he put them in a modern parlance. Therefore, looking at things like instead of saying they put the essence of the man and the et cetera, into the clay pot, et cetera, he uses word DNA, genetics, things like that. And Michael Sarian has done the same thing, but with translations from many cultures as well, but mainly the Irish stuff. Michael Sarian is extremely interesting. I don't know how accurate it is, but I think it's cool what he's doing. But he's basically an Irish version of Sitchin, is what he is, and it's fascinating. So definitely go check
You
that
make
out.
these words up?
No, dude, I do not make stuff up.
Oh,
I only lie
okay.
when it's funny. Yeah, lying is funny the way I use it. Exaggeration. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah, Michael Sarian. Definitely check him out if you haven't. He's got some epically long diatribes into stuff too. Whew, boy. Uh, and he actually, if you want a real audiobook diving into Bloodlines, go watch his thing, dude, because he's got a Bloodline video that is way killer. And he gets
Yep.
super deep. It's awesome. Yeah. All right. Anyway, thank you all very much. And I need a piece of wisdom. Let's see. Thundero has given wisdom. DeWolf has given wisdom. I'm afraid to ask, but George, word of wisdom, please.
Afraid to ask.
All right, all right. Okay. Be good to people, because if you're not good to people, people won't be good to you.
That's right. And if you're not good to people, Mothra will come and get you.
Mothra.
He's heartbroken that Mothra
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
exist.
I apologize. I went and hurt George's feelings. Anyway, guys, later.
Gesundheit.
Achoo.